Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we slip quietly out of the modern world and into the cool waiting earth, imagining what it was like to lower yourself into a hidden underground dugout in the Middle Ages, knowing that above you the night is wide, unpredictable, and sometimes hostile. You picture the last smear of twilight on the horizon as you crouch near a patch of ground that looks ordinary enough, just dirt grass. Maybe a few stones, but you know better. You probably will not survive this if you bring modern expectations of comfort with you, because nothing about this is designed to soothe, except in a very particular medieval way. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are settling in, maybe tell me where you are listening from, and what the local time is for you right now. Now dim the lights. You're standing at the edge of a small settlement far from any castle walls, where people rely more on silence than strength. It is late, but not quite dark, the careful in-between hour when you can still see well enough to move without a torch. You kneel, fingers brushing away loose soil, and there it is, the concealed entrance. A wooden hatch smeared with mud covered earlier with straw and turf so it blends into the ground, like it was never disturbed. This is not a dungeon, not a romantic hideout, just a dugout carved patiently into earth by hands that understood danger as a regular visitor. As you lift the hatch, a cool breath of air rises to meet you. It smells damp heavy like roots and clay and old smoke. This is your first sensory shift. Above ground, the evening carried hints of grass and animals and hearth fires. Down here, everything compresses into earth. You lower yourself carefully, feet first, gripping the rough ladder rungs. They creak softly, a sound that feels far too loud. You pause, listening. In the Middle Ages, sound travelled differently in your imagination than it does now. Without engines or constant background noise, even a small clatter could feel dangerous. Many rural communities used underground dugouts, sometimes called earth houses or souterrains, especially in parts of Ireland, Scotland and Eastern Europe, as temporary refuges during raids. That is a mainstream historical fact most textbooks mention, briefly then move on from, but tonight you linger inside it. Your boots touch packed earth. This space is low, forcing you to stoop. You pull the hatch closed above you, and just like that the world shrinks. Darkness thickens, not absolute, but layered. Your eyes strain at first, catching vague shapes, a wall curving inward, a niche carved into the side. Historians still argue whether these dugouts were meant primarily for sleeping or for storage and emergency hiding, but here you are preparing to do both because medieval life rarely allowed such neat categories. You take a slow breath, and then another. The air feels stale compared to the open evening, but not suffocating. Somewhere above or nearby, a narrow ventilation shaft allows fresh air to seep down. You cannot see it, but you trust it exists because people before you trusted it with their lives. There is a quirky detail that often surprises modern listeners. Some dugouts were intentionally curved or bent not straight tunnels to prevent smoke or light from travelling directly to the entrance. That bend also helped hide occupants if an enemy forced their way inside. It is clever, simple engineering born from fear and observation rather than blueprints. You shift your weight, feeling the chill seep through the soles of your boots. The ground holds the cold of previous nights of seasons layered in soil. Sleeping underground in the Middle Ages was not about comfort. It was about being unseen. You reach out fingers brushing against the wall. It is rough, gritty, leaving fine dust on your skin. No plaster. No stone lining here, just compacted earth reinforced in places with timber. Some scholars believe that straw or woven mats were pressed against the walls to slow erosion, while others suggest these were bare more often than not. The debate lingers because organic materials rarely survive centuries underground. As your eyes adjust, you notice faint light, a glow from a small oil lamp, already placed deeper in the dugout. It is shielded the flame tiny because smoke is a risk. Too much smoke means coughing watery eyes and worse visible plumes escaping through vents. Fire management was a constant concern. Even above-ground medieval homes struggled with smoke control. Down here it becomes an obsession. You move toward the light, careful not to bump your head, and settle near the wall. The silence is intense but not empty. You hear the soft drip of moisture somewhere. Water always finds a way. You hear your own breathing louder than you like. In the Middle Ages, people were more accustomed to shared spaces and bodily sounds. Privacy was rare. Still, you try to breathe quietly, instinctively. The dugout seems to listen back. There's an odd psychological effect to being underground, one that historians still discuss. Did people feel safer or more anxious below the earth? Written sources are scarce, but folklore suggests both reactions existed at once. You think briefly of the reason you are here. Maybe there are rumours of raiders moving through the region. Viking incursions, border skirmishes, or local feuds were real threats in many medieval landscapes. Even in later centuries, peasants hid from tax collectors or soldiers demanding supplies. This dugout is not heroic, it is practical. It is the medieval equivalent of turning off the lights and pretending no one is home except with much higher stakes. You adjust your position, feeling the wall at your back, the packed earth firm and unyielding. There is comfort in that solidity, strangely. Earth does not move quickly. It holds. It absorbs sound. That is part of the appeal. A fringe theory suggests some people associated underground spaces with the womb, a place of origin and protection, which may have made sleeping here psychologically tolerable. Not all scholars agree with this interpretation, but it adds an interesting layer as you settle in. Your muscles begin to relax just a little. The day above ground was long. Work always was. Farming, tending animals, repairing tools. Sleep even here is still sleep. You listen again, straining for any sound from above. Nothing. Just the earth doing what it has always done, holding secrets, holding you, and as the lamp flickers softly, you prepare to lie down, knowing this is only the beginning of the night. The hatch above you settles into place with a muted thump that feels final even though you know it can be lifted again. That sound marks a boundary. Above it is the open medieval night with its risks, its rumours, its wandering figures. Below it is this compressed pocket of safety carved patiently and maintained quietly. You sit still for a moment, letting the reality of being sealed underground sink in. The air changes almost immediately. It feels thicker, slower, like it expects you to match its pace. You reach up and brush a little loose soil from your hair. Fine grains cling to your fingers, dry and cool. The entrance is well disguised, not just hidden by the hatch, but by the way the surrounding ground has been disturbed and then carefully restored. Medieval communities learned through hard experience that an obvious entrance was an invitation. Grass, replanted straw, scattered even animal tracks deliberately left nearby to confuse anyone looking too closely. One mainstream historical fact worth lingering on is that concealment techniques like this were widely practiced in rural Europe, especially during periods of instability. People did not need castles to understand camouflage. You shift closer to the wall, instinctively creating space beneath the ladder. No one wants to be directly under the entrance if it is forced open. This is not paranoia, it is routine. You imagine how many times this dugout has been used before. The earth walls bear faint marks where hands have brushed, where baskets have scraped, where bodies have leaned in the dark. These traces are invisible to the eye now, but you feel them in the smoothness of certain spots worn by repetition. The lamp nearby throws a small, steady glow. It is likely fueled by animal fat or plant oil, both common in the medieval period. Olive oil was used in some regions, while in colder climates tallow was more typical. The flame is kept deliberately low. You're not here to read or work. You're here to wait and eventually to sleep. Fire is a servant, not a comfort. There is a quirky tidbit that sometimes surprises people. In some underground shelters, lamps were placed behind small stone or clay shields to further reduce light leakage and airflow disruption. It is an extra layer of caution that speaks volumes about lived fear. As your breathing slows, you become more aware of the silence above, or rather the absence of expected noise. No barking dogs, no distant voices, even insects sound muted. The earth absorbs vibration, turning sharp sounds into dull suggestions. You wonder briefly how people learn to trust this quiet instead of fearing it. Historians still argue whether long-term use of underground shelters led to increased anxiety, or whether familiarity bred calm. The truth was likely uneven, shaped by personality, experience and circumstance. You lean back and test the wall again. It is cool but not freezing. One of the understated advantages of sleeping underground is thermal stability. The Earth maintains a relatively consistent temperature compared to the surface. In winter, it is warmer than the air. In summer, cooler. Medieval people may not have spoken in scientific terms, but they understood this principle well. It is why root cellars and storage pits were so common. Tonight you benefit from the same logic. You listen again, ears tuned upward. This listening is not dramatic. It is constant, habitual. Above ground, life trains you to notice changes in weather or animal behavior. Below ground, you listen for human interference. Footsteps, voices, metal clinking. Any unfamiliar sound could mean discovery. You hold your breath for a moment, testing how quiet you can be. Then you let it out slowly. The dugout does not echo much. Sound dies quickly here, smothered by soil. Your thoughts drift briefly to the people who built this place. It was not quick work. Digging by hand with simple tools took days, sometimes weeks. The soil had to be stable enough not to collapse, but workable enough to shape. In regions with heavy clay dugouts were deeper and more reinforced. In sandy areas they were shallower or lined with wood or stone. Archaeological evidence shows surprising variation, reminding modern scholars that there was no single medieval experience. Each dugout reflects local knowledge. You adjust your position again, knees bent, shoulders slightly hunched. Space is limited but designed with human proportions in mind. You're not expected to stand upright. That would waste depth and increase visibility from the surface. Comfort is secondary to concealment. Still, the arrangement feels intentional. A small shelf carved into the wall holds the lamp. Another niche contains a few items, maybe a clay pot, a wrapped bundle. These are essentials only. Anything extra would slow escape or clutter the space. There is a faint, earthy smell that grows stronger the longer you sit. It is not unpleasant, but it is persistent. Earth, moisture, old smoke. This scent becomes associated with safety over time. People learn to relax in it, even crave it during tense periods. Some folklorists suggest that this smell became comforting precisely because it signalled refuge. That interpretation is debated, but it makes sense as you breathe it in now, your muscles slowly unclenching. You think about the rules that govern behaviour down here. No sudden movements, no loud whispers. Children taught to stay close to cover their mouths if they cough. Elders positioned where they can be helped easily. These rules are rarely written down, but passed through practice. Social order does not vanish underground, it adapts. Even now alone or with others just out of sight, you feel those expectations shaping your posture and movements. The lamp flickers responding to subtle shifts in air. Somewhere the ventilation shaft does its quiet work. It is narrow, carefully angled, sometimes lined with stones or wood to prevent collapse. Finding these shafts in archaeological digs is difficult, which is why some researchers once assumed underground shelters were dangerously unventilated. More recent studies suggest otherwise. Medieval builders understood airflow better than they are often given credit for. You close your eyes briefly, then open them again. Darkness presses in from all sides, but the small pool of light anchors you. This is not the dramatic darkness of a cave, but a managed one. You could reach the ladder in a few steps. You know where the walls curve. Familiarity is calming. That familiarity is what allows sleep to come later despite the circumstances. For now you wait. Waiting is part of the process. You let time stretch unmeasured by clocks. Somewhere above the night deepens. Down here the dugout holds steady, patient and silent, as it has done for countless nights before yours. At first the darkness feels like an intruder pressing in on you from every side, but slowly it begins to soften. Your eyes stop straining. Shapes lose their edges and become familiar silhouettes instead of threats. This is not blindness. It is a learned way of seeing. Medieval people spent far more time in low light than you do now, and their eyes adapted accordingly. Candlelight, firelight, moonlight filtering through smoke. Darkness was not an emergency. It was a condition. You blink slowly, letting your vision settle into its new rhythm. The lamp's glow is just enough to mark where the wall curves and where the floor dips slightly. You notice how shadows behave differently underground. They do not stretch dramatically. They cling close to objects, soft and rounded. Makes the space feel smaller but also more contained, like being wrapped in something heavy and protective. You shift your weight again, listening to the faint scuff of your clothing against packed earth. The sound is dull, absorbed almost immediately. That absorption is reassuring. Above ground sound carries unpredictably, bouncing off walls, travelling farther than expected. Down here the earth acts like a blanket. You remember hearing that medieval builders sometimes chose locations specifically because the soil dampened noise well. That practical awareness did not require theory. It came from trial, error, and survival. Your breathing continues to slow, matching the stillness around you. In the dark, time stretches. Without visual cues, moments blur together. You might have been down here for minutes or for much longer. It is hard to tell. This loss of precise timekeeping is not unsettling. It is strangely freeing. Historians still debate how people in the Middle Ages experienced time psychologically, especially during long nights. Some argue that without clocks, time felt more cyclical, tied to fatigue and light rather than numbers. Others suggest people were keenly aware of hours through habit and routine. Down here, both ideas seem to coexist. You reach out and touch the floor, brushing away a bit of loose dirt. It is firm beneath the surface, packed by repeated use. This is not freshly dug earth. It has been pressed flat by body settling into sleep, by knees and elbows shifting in the dark. That thought brings a quiet sense of continuity. You're not the first to sit exactly here, feeling exactly this mixture of tension and relief. A faint drip echoes somewhere in the distance, slow and irregular. Water seeps through soil no matter how carefully you dig. Medieval dugouts often had shallow channels carved into the floor to guide moisture away from sleeping areas. Some archaeologists have found evidence of simple drainage systems, small trenches leading to a sump pit. Others argue these features were accidental, shaped by erosion rather than design. The debate continues, but either way, the people who used these spaces knew where it was safest to lie. You listen again, more out of habit than fear. Nothing. The quiet is complete enough that your own heartbeat feels audible, a gentle thud in your ears. You place a hand against your chest for a moment, grounding yourself. The earth does not respond. It simply holds. There is a subtle mental shift that happens as you accept the darkness rather than fighting it. Your thoughts slow. Instead of scanning for danger, your mind begins to wander inward. You think of the day that led you here. The work, the rumours, the decision to use the dugout tonight. Medieval life was filled with such decisions, often made with incomplete information. Sleep underground was a precaution, not a certainty. You might emerge at dawn to find nothing happened at all. A quirky detail emerges from the edge of your memory. Some folklore suggests that people believed underground spaces were closer to the realm of spirits or ancestors. In certain regions, sleeping below ground was thought to offer protection, not just from human enemies, but from wandering supernatural forces. Whether this belief was widespread or limited to specific communities is unclear. Scholars still argue about how seriously such ideas were taken. But in the dark surrounded by Earth, it is easy to see how imagination might wander in that direction. You adjust your posture, finding a position that eases the strain on your back. Space is limited, but your body adapts. Knees drawn slightly up, shoulders angled to fit the curve of the wall. You feel the coolness of the ground through your clothing, but it's steady, not biting. Over time, your body heat will warm the immediate area. This is another small comfort unnoticed at first. The lamp flickers gently, its light breathing in and out with the air. You resist the urge to adjust it. Movement creates sound. Even small changes feel unnecessary now. You trust the setup as it is. That trust is earned through repetition. Medieval families who used dugouts regularly developed a sense of when everything was in its proper place. Any deviation stood out sharply. You close your eyes again longer this time. The darkness behind your eyelids is no different from the darkness in the space. That sameness is calming. It means you do not have to choose between seeing and not seeing. Both states feel acceptable. Sleep does not come yet, but rest begins. You think briefly about how modern minds often associate darkness with fear. This association is learned reinforced by artificial lighting and stories. In the Middle Ages, darkness was simply part of a life. People navigated it daily. They slept with it, woke within it, worked by its edges. Here underground, that relationship is intensified, but not entirely unfamiliar. Your breathing deepens. The drip continues its slow rhythm. The earth presses gently around you, unmoving. Somewhere above, the night continues its own quiet routines. Down here, you're suspended in a pocket of shadow and patience, learning to see without light, to rest without certainty, and to accept the dark as an ally rather than an enemy. The longer you sit here, the more aware you become of the air itself. Not just its temperature, but its weight, its movement, the way it brushes your skin when you inhale. Underground air has personality. It does not rush. It does not swirl. It waits. You take a slow breath through your nose and notice the faint taste of earth mineral and old smoke lingering together. It is not unpleasant, but it is unmistakable. This is the smell of staying hidden. You tilt your head slightly as if that might help you sense where the air comes from. Somewhere above or off to the side, a narrow passage allows fresh air to seep downward. You cannot feel a breeze, but you can feel the absence of suffocation, which is its own quiet reassurance. People who relied on dugouts learned very quickly which spaces were safe and which were not. Oral knowledge mattered here more than written instruction. One badly placed shelter could turn deadly within hours. Excavations across medieval Europe show that many underground shelters were carefully positioned to take advantage of natural airflow. Openings were often angled uphill or disguised among rocks and hedges. In some cases, the vent was nothing more than a loose cluster of stones that allowed air through while blocking light. This was not accidental. It reflects a practical understanding of how smoke and breath behave in confined spaces. Long before modern engineering, people learned by surviving and by watching others fail. You become aware of your breathing again and instinctively slow it. Not out of fear, but out of habit. Shallow, steady breaths reduce condensation and sound. In a shared dugout, this would be unspoken etiquette. No heavy sighs, no sharp inhales. Children were taught to breathe quietly almost as soon as they could walk. It sounds extreme now, but for medieval families near contested borders or raiding routes, this knowledge was as essential as knowing when to plant crops. There is an odd calm in focusing on something so basic. Inhale, exhale. The rhythm gives your mind something simple to hold on to. Time continues to stretch. Without visual distractions, your thoughts drift more slowly like leaves on still water. You wonder how many people before you have sat here doing exactly this, counting breaths instead of hours. A less commonly discussed detail is how people tested these spaces before trusting them overnight. Some accounts suggest that small animals or candles were placed inside new dugouts to observe airflow. If the flame guttered too quickly, or an animal became distressed, the space was abandoned or reworked. This kind of trial and error does not leave clear traces in the archaeological record, but it fits with the careful caution evident in surviving structures. Debate continues among specialists about how systematic these tests were, but the concern itself is undeniable. You shift slightly, redistributing your weight. The movement stirs a faint swirl of cooler air near the floor. Temperature underground behaves differently than above. Warm air rises, cool air settles, but the space is so compact that these layers press close together. You notice that your hands feel cooler than your chest, your face warmer than your feet. It is subtle, but perceptible. Medieval people were attuned to such small bodily signals. They had to be. You think briefly of the risk of stale air. It is easy to assume that sleeping underground was inherently dangerous, but evidence suggests people managed these risks effectively. Dugouts that were used repeatedly show signs of long-term habitation, not panic or sudden abandonment. That implies successful ventilation and tolerable conditions, at least for the duration they were meant to be occupied. These were not places to live full-time. They were places to endure a night or two. There is a strange intimacy in sharing air with the earth. Every breath you take has already passed through layers of soil and stone. It feels older somehow, filtered by centuries. This thought would not have occurred to medieval occupants in scientific terms, but many cultures associated breath with life force or spirit. Being underground, breathing air that emerged from hidden places may have carried symbolic weight alongside practical function. You listen again, but this time not for sound above. You listen to the dugout itself, the faint creak of settling soil, the soft whisper of air moving through a narrow channel. These sounds are steady, predictable. They become part of the background like the ticking of a clock you eventually stop noticing. Your body relaxes further as nothing changes. Some modern writers romanticize underground shelters as desperate or primitive. That view misses the quiet skill involved. Choosing the right depth, carving curves instead of straight lines, managing airflow without drawing attention. These were learned techniques passed through generations. There was nothing careless about them. In fact, they represent a kind of invisible architecture designed not to impress but to disappear. You place a hand near the wall again and feel the coolness there compared to the air. Earth absorbs heat slowly. This is why the space remains stable, even as temperatures outside fluctuate. On cold nights, this would have felt like a gift. On hot days, a relief. People noticed these effects long before they could explain them. They simply used them. Your breathing has settled into a deep, even pattern now. Each inhale feels easier than the last. The air does not feel thin. It feels sufficient. That sufficiency is everything. Without it, fear would creep back in. With it, your body allows itself to rest. Some researchers question whether all dugouts were safe for sleeping, suggesting that a few may have been intended only for short hiding or storage. The distinction matters to modern classification, but to the people using them the decision was situational. If the space held air and stayed hidden, it was good enough for the night. You close your eyes once more, trusting the invisible pathways that bring you breath. The earth does not rush you. It gives you exactly what you need, no more, no less. In this quiet exchange between lungs and soil, the night deepens and the dugout continues its silent work of keeping you alive. As your breathing settles into an easy rhythm, another sensation slowly moves forward and claims your attention. The smell. It has been there since you arrived, but now that your nerves have calmed, it becomes clearer, layered, almost readable. Earth is the first note damp and mineral like freshly turned soil after rain. Beneath that is smoke old and faint, not sharp enough to sting, but present enough to remind you that fire has lived here before. Then there is something unmistakably human. Woolskin, the ghost of sweat worked into fabric. This is the scent of survival. You wrinkle your nose slightly, then relax again. There is no point resisting it. Medieval life was saturated with smells that modern noses rarely encounter. Wood smoke clung to everything. Animals lived close to people. Bathing was occasional, practical and seasonal rather than daily. Down here all of those odours compress and linger, yet none of them signal danger. On the contrary, they signal familiarity. If the dugout smelled wrong, too sharp, too stagnant, that would be cause for concern. Accounts from medieval households suggest that people judge spaces by scent as much as sight. A place that smelled of rot or sour damp was avoided. A place that smelled of earth and smoke was considered usable. That sensory judgment was reliable in a world without instruments. You breathe in again, slower this time, letting your body decide whether this air feels safe. It does. There is an odd comfort in recognizing the smell of other people who have used this space. It means you are not alone in time, even if you are alone in the moment. Generations may have crouched here, hiding from raids, weather, or wandering soldiers. Their presence lingers not as ghosts, but as absorbed warmth and residue. Archaeological studies of underground shelters often find layers of compacted ash and organic matter embedded in the floor. These are not accidents. They are the remains of repeated occupation. You shift slightly and the scent changes just a bit. The movement stirs dust, releasing a drier, chalky smell from the walls. You remember that medieval dugouts were often reworked over time. Walls scraped back, floors levelled again, entrances adjusted. They were not static structures. They evolved with use. That is why no two are exactly alike, even within the same region. A curious detail emerges when you think about how people tried to manage these smells. Some communities burned specific herbs or grasses before sealing a dugout, not just for light but to refresh the space. Juniper, rosemary, or even dried dung were used depending on what was available. The practice may have had practical benefits, masking human scent or discouraging insects. Some historians suggest it also had symbolic meaning as was to cleanse the space. Others remain unconvinced, pointing out the lack of direct written evidence. Still, the idea persists, supported by traces of unusual plant remains found in certain sites. You become aware of your own smell now, wool warmed by your body leather, traces of the day's labour. In a shared dugout, these smells would blend together until no single person stood out. That blending mattered. Strong individual scent could give away a hiding place, especially if animals or dogs were involved above ground. People learned to minimize anything that made them noticeable. Even food was chosen with smell in mind. Your stomach gives a faint, quiet reminder of itself, and with it comes another layer of scent. Dried grain, salt, maybe a bit of cheese wrapped carefully in cloth. Food kept underground absorbed the smell of its surroundings. People accepted that. Taste was shaped by environment. No one expected freshness in the modern sense, they expected sustenance. You think about how smell connects directly to memory. One breath can pull up an entire scene. For medieval people, the smell of a dugout might forever recall nights of fear and closeness, whispered prayers, children pressed against parents. Or it might recall relief, the moment when danger passed and they could surface again. Smell carried emotional weight long before anyone tried to study it. The lamp's faint smoke adds another thread barely visible, curling upward and disappearing into the unseen vent. You're glad it does not linger. Too much smoke would sting your eyes and throat. Managing smell was as important as managing light. Everything here is about balance, enough fire to see, enough air to breathe, enough concealment to remain unnoticed. Some modern interpretations imagine underground shelters as filthy, unbearable spaces. That assumption does not hold up well under closer examination. While conditions were certainly rough by modern standards, people adapted quickly. Noses dull, expectations shift. What matters is whether the space keeps you alive. By that measure, this dugout succeeds. You rest your head back, inhaling slowly, no longer cataloguing each scent, but letting them merge into a single earthy background. Your body stops reacting. Acceptance settles in. The smell is no longer information, it is atmosphere. Outside, the world continues to move, full of wind and sound and uncertainty. Down here the air remains, still holding its layered history. You breathe it in without thinking. Now the way countless others once did, and with each breath the dugout feels less like a hiding place and more like a temporary home. Your hand drifts toward the small niche carved into the wall, guided by memory rather than sight. You know what waits there because it has been placed deliberately, not carelessly. Underground, every object has a purpose, and every purpose is weighed against space and silence. Your fingers brush against rough wood first, then the smooth curve of clay. Tools within reach mean you do not have to fumble or search if something goes wrong. You take a moment to inventory what is here, not by listing it aloud, but by touch. A short-handled spade, its edge dulled from use. A coil of cord, stiff but reliable. A small knife, more for cutting rope or cloth than for defence. These are not weapons, they are solutions. Medieval households often kept essential tools close at hand, even when hiding, because survival rarely depended on fighting. It depended on fixing, digging, binding, and waiting. Material finds from underground shelters support this picture. Archaeologists frequently uncover everyday items rather than valuables. Broken pottery, simple iron implements, wooden fragments. Precious objects were kept elsewhere or not brought down at all. The goal was not to preserve wealth, but life. Anything unnecessary became a liability in the dark. You run your thumb along the edge of the spade, feeling the nicks and wear. This tool has history. It has cut root-shaped walls, maybe even cleared a blocked vent during a heavy rain. The presence of tools down here suggests that people expected to intervene if conditions changed. Dugouts were not sealed tombs. They were living spaces responsive to the earth around them. There is a curious detail worth noticing. In some sites, tools found underground show more wear than those found above ground. This has led some researchers to suggest that maintenance inside these shelters was constant and urgent. When a wall slumped or water pooled, there was no option to delay repairs. Immediate action mattered. Others argue the wear reflects reuse of older tools relegated to underground duty. Either way, the tools tell a story of adaptation. You set the spade back into its niche, careful to place it exactly where you found it. Order matters here. In darkness, familiarity is safety. You do not want to knock something over in the night, creating a noise or losing track of where it landed. Medieval people were meticulous about this. Children were taught where things belonged and corrected if they moved them thoughtlessly. Your hand finds the coil of cord next. It smells faintly of plant fibre and earth. Cordage was indispensable in medieval life, used for everything from tying bundles to repairing clothing. Down here it could secure a loose board bind, a crack in the wall, or lower something quietly. It is simple, but versatile. The kind of object you only appreciate fully when you do not have it. You think briefly about what is not here. No metal armour, no bulky furniture, no excess. The dugout is stripped down to essentials. This minimalism is not ideological, it is practical. Space is finite. Anything you bring in must justify itself. Modern minimalist trends have nothing on medieval necessity. A small container sits beside the tools and you recognize it by its shape. It likely holds tinder-dried fungus or charred cloth kept in case the lamp goes out. Fire is never taken for granted. Relighting a flame underground requires care. Sparks are dangerous. Smoke is revealing. Having the right materials ready makes all the difference. Medieval fire-making was a practiced skill, not a novelty. There is evidence that some underground shelters also stored emergency food and water. Jars buried into the floor, sealed with wax or cloth. These caches were meant to last through short periods of hiding. Longer stays risked spoilage or discovery. Debate persists among specialists about how often people slept underground by choice versus necessity. Some argue it was rare and only during extreme danger. Others point to wear patterns and repeated modifications suggesting regular use during unstable times. You adjust your position again, mindful of the tools around you. Even in rest, awareness remains. This is not anxious vigilance, it is quiet readiness. Your body holds the knowledge that you might need to move quickly, but not urgently. The presence of tools also hints at something else. Agency. You're not entirely passive down here. You're not simply waiting to be found or spared. You have means, however limited, to respond. That sense of control, however small, is deeply calming. It turns hiding into strategy. You imagine a child in this space learning by observation, watching adults handle tools carefully, listening to instructions whispered in the dark. These lessons would shape their understanding of safety and problem solving. Underground nights were classrooms as much as refuges. Your hand withdraws from the niche and you rest it on your knee. Everything is in place. Nothing rattles, nothing shifts. The dugout feels prepared, not abandoned. That preparation allows your thoughts to slow again. Outside time continues to move in ways you cannot measure. Inside, the arrangement of simple objects anchors you in the present. You know where you are. You know what you can do if you must. For now, that is enough. Eventually your body reminds you that it expects rest, not just waiting. Muscles soften first, then joints, each one easing as if granted permission. You shift closer to the wall where the ground is slightly higher and drier. This is not accidental. The floor slopes just enough that moisture drifts away from where people lie down. You feel it with your palm, the subtle rise that makes all the difference over several hours of sleep. There is no bed in the way you would recognize it. What waits for you is a thin layer of straw or dried grass pressed flat by repeated use. It crackles softly when you settle onto it, a sound that feels too loud until it fades back into silence. Straw was a common bedding material across medieval Europe, used by peasants and nobles alike. Mattresses filled with feathers or wool existed, but they were luxuries, not something you would drag into a hidden shelter. Down here, simplicity rules. You lower yourself, carefully easing onto your side rather than dropping your full weight at once. The ground is firm but not unforgiving. It holds you in place. You adjust the bundle beneath your head, a rolled cloak or sack, positioning it just right so your neck does not strain. Comfort is improvised, not expected. Small adjustments matter more than softness. Your knees draw slightly toward your chest. This position conserves warmth and fits the space. In shared shelters, people often slept close together, not out of affection but necessity. Body heat mattered. Tonight, even if you are alone, your posture reflects that inherited logic. Curling inward feels natural here. You notice how the earth presses back gently, providing resistance rather than collapse. This firmness can feel oddly reassuring. Unlike a soft mattress that shifts and sinks, the ground stays put. There is no surprise movement beneath you. Some modern sleepers struggle with this idea, but medieval bodies adapted quickly. Physical labour during the day meant deeper fatigue at night. Sleep came faster wherever it was allowed to land. A lesser-known detail appears as you settle. In some regions, people placed a thin layer of ash beneath straw bedding in underground spaces. Ash helped deter insects and absorbed moisture. Traces of ash have been found compressed into the floors of certain dugouts, though not all scholars agree on its purpose. Some argue it simply reflects hearth cleaning rather than deliberate bedding preparation. Still, the idea lingers practical and quiet. You pull your cloak closer around your shoulders. Wool is heavy but dependable. It holds warmth even when damp. That property made it invaluable in medieval life, especially in confined, humid spaces like this. Linen might feel cooler and lighter, but it does not protect as well against chill seeping up from the ground. Choices like this were learned over generations. The lamp remains where it is. No one bothers to extinguish it yet. Total darkness is not always ideal. A small light offers reassurance, helps orient you if you wake suddenly. The flame is low enough not to betray you, high enough to prevent disorientation. Balance again. Always balance. You lie still for a while, testing the arrangement. The straw shifts, then settles. The sounds fade. Your breathing deepens. Above ground sleep might be interrupted by wind or animals. Down here the interruptions are internal. A sudden thought, a memory, a flicker of concern, but even those begin to slow. Some modern writers imagine medieval people sleeping poorly, constantly alert. That image is only partly true. Yes, danger existed, but exhaustion was real too. After long days of work, bodies claimed rest wherever they could. Evidence from medical texts of the period suggests that people recognized different depths of sleep and even structured their nights around them. Underground or not, sleep was still sleep. You close your eyes and feel the ground cool through the straw, steady and predictable. The dugout does not rock, it does not sway, it simply exists. That stability allows your mind to loosen its grip on the world above. You think briefly of how strange this would feel to someone unused to it. The low ceiling, the lack of air movement, the closeness of earth on all sides. Yet for those who grew up with it, this was simply another place to rest. Not ideal, not permanent, but workable. Your shoulders sink a little more. The tension you did not realize you were holding begins to release. Even your jaw relaxes. The quiet deepens, not because the world has changed, but because you have. Sleep does not arrive all at once. It approaches in stages. A drifting thought, a half-formed image. The sense that time is no longer urgent. You remain aware of where you are, but the awareness softens edges, blurring like shadows in low light. The dugout holds you straw and earth doing their patient work. Above the night continues unseen. Below your body finally allows itself to rest. Sleep does not silence your ears completely, even as your body settles deeper into the straw, and earth part of you remains tuned outward alert in a way that feels automatic rather than anxious. This is how rest works here. It is layered. One part of you drifts while another keeps watch. You're not consciously listening anymore, yet sound still finds you. The dugout has its own quiet language. You hear the soft settling of soil, a tiny shift that could be nothing more than moisture redistributing. The faint drip returns irregular but familiar now. These sounds are not threats. They are background like the ticking of a distant clock. What you're waiting for are changes, anything out of pattern. Above you the ground acts like a thick blanket. Footsteps, if they come, will not sound like footsteps. They will arrive as pressure, as a dull vibration rather than a sharp noise. People who slept underground learn to recognize this difference. A rabbit passing overhead feels nothing like a booted foot. Rain striking the surface creates a broad, even murmur, while carts or animals produce uneven tremors. Your body knows this even if your mind does not articulate it. You pause your breathing for a moment, not because you heard something, but because stillness makes listening easier. Then you resume slow and shallow. In shared dugouts, this quiet attentiveness was communal. No one needed to announce concern. A sudden stillness would spread naturally, everyone listening together. Written accounts from border regions mention nights spent awake counting sounds waiting for dawn. These accounts do not describe panic so much as patience. Danger was expected to be subtle. Loud threats were rare. Most harm arrived quietly. That expectation shaped how people listened. There is a strange detail worth lingering on. Some dugouts were deliberately positioned near paths or fields not far from them. The idea was not complete isolation, but concealment within normalcy. Sounds of regular movement could mask the presence of those hiding below. This strategy seems counterintuitive, yet it appears repeatedly in archaeological patterns. Not everyone agrees on its intent, but the placement is consistent enough to raise questions. You turn your head, slightly pressing your ear closer to the ground. The earth feels cool against your cheek. You pick up a faint hum, more felt than heard. wind moving through grass above, the night breathing. It is oddly soothing. These are not human sounds. They are part of the larger rhythm that continues whether you're here or not. Listening becomes less active as sleep deepens. Your body no longer checks every sound. Instead, it sets a threshold. Anything loud enough or wrong enough will wake you. Everything else is filtered out. This is not a skill you consciously practice. It is one learned through necessity, refined over years. Some modern interpretations suggest medieval people were constantly on edge. That assumption ignores how adaptable humans are. Living with risk does not always mean living in fear. Often it means learning which signals matter and which can be ignored. Underground sleeping sharpened that discrimination. False alarms wasted energy. Calm endurance preserved it. You drift again, hovering between awareness and rest. A sound passes overhead. Something small, maybe an animal. Your body registers it and lets it go. No tension returns. The dugout remains quiet. There is a psychological comfort in knowing you cannot see the source of sounds. Vision often exaggerates danger. Here you rely on vibration and resonance instead. This limits imagination. A noise is just a noise, not a shape or shadow. That simplicity helps sleep come. You remember dimly that children were often taught games that involved identifying sounds. Learning which noises belonged to whether animals or people was practical knowledge. Those lessons followed them into spaces like this. Listening was not passive. It was learned behavior. Your breathing deepens again. Muscles release further. The straw shifts slightly beneath you, then goes still. The lamp flickers once, then steadies. Nothing else changes. Above ground, the night continues to move through its hours. Somewhere a door creaks, a fire dies down, a dog lifts its head and settles again. None of it reaches you clearly. The earth absorbs it all, leaving only a muted suggestion. You're no longer actively listening now. Your body has decided the night is safe enough. The part of you that stays awake retreats just far enough to let sleep take hold. Wrapped in soil and silence, you drift deeper, trusting that if danger comes, sound will find you in time. Sometime later, you wake just enough to realize that hunger has crept in quietly. It is not sharp or urgent, just a dull reminder low in your body. Underground, even appetite behaves differently. Without daylight or activity to mark the hours, your sense of when to eat loosens. Still, the body remembers its needs. You shift slightly and reach toward a small bundle kept close at hand. Food in a place like this is chosen with care. Nothing fragile, nothing that crumbles loudly or smells too strongly. You unwrap a cloth, slowly feeling for familiar shapes. A piece of coarse bread, dense and dark. Maybe a bit of dried cheese, firm and slightly oily to the touch. These are staples relied upon across much of medieval Europe because they keep well and offer steady energy. Bread, especially rye or barley-based, was not soft or airy. It was meant to last. You tear off a small piece, careful to do it slowly. The sound is muted, but you still pause afterward, listening. Old habits die hard. When you bring the bread to your mouth, you chew deliberately, letting it soften before swallowing. Crumbs are avoided. Even the smallest mess matters in a confined space. Cleanliness here is about function, not comfort. There is a faint, comforting taste of smoke and grain. Bread baked in wood-fired ovens absorb those flavors naturally. Down here, the taste feels grounding. Eating reminds you that this is not just a hiding place, but a pause in normal life. People didn't stop being human because they went underground. They still ate, whispered, worried, and rested. Archaeological finds in some dugouts include storage jars and food remains, suggesting that people expected to stay for several hours or even days if needed. These were not long-term pantries, but emergency reserves. The presence of such supplies challenges the idea that underground shelters were used only for brief moments. At the same time, not every site shows evidence of food storage, which keeps the question open and context-dependent. You take a sip from a small container, careful not to slosh. Water tastes different underground. cooler. Slightly metallic if it has been stored in clay or leather, still it refreshes. Hydration matters more than you might expect. Dry air and shallow breathing can leave your throat tight without you noticing until you swallow. There is an odd little detail that surfaces in your thoughts. In some regions, people favoured onions or garlic as part of underground rations, believing they offered protection against illness or misfortune. The strong smell might seem counterproductive, but the belief was persistent. Whether this was based on observed health benefits or superstition remains unclear. What matters is that food carried meaning as well as calories. You wrap the remaining bread carefully and return it to its place. Everything goes back where it belongs. Order prevents accidents. In the dark, predictability is comfort. As you settle again, your stomach eases. Hunger fades into the background, replaced by warmth spreading slowly through your limbs. Eating has that effect, especially after long hours of tension. It signals safety. For medieval people, a shared meal underground could be a powerful reassurance that life continued despite fear above. You lie still, letting digestion do its quiet work. Your thoughts drift slower now. Food has anchored you in your body again, pulling you away from distant worries. The dugout feels more inhabited, less empty. Some modern descriptions paint underground shelters as joyless, purely fearful spaces. That view overlooks moments like this: a shared crust of bread, a sip of water, small acts of normalcy that made endurance possible. These were not heroic gestures, but they mattered. Your breathing evens out once more. The taste lingers faintly, then fades. You adjust your cloak and let your eyes close fully. The dugout holds its steady silence. You have eaten. You are warm enough. For now, that is sufficient. The small flame nearby gives off more than light. It offers a suggestion of warmth, just enough to take the edge off the dampness that seeps from the ground. You're careful not to move closer than necessary. Fire underground demands respect. Too much heat dries the air and stirs smoke. Too little, and the chill creeps back in. You watch the flame the way people have always watched fire, not with fascination, but with quiet calculation. The lamp is simple, probably clay or iron, its wick trimmed short. Excess flame would only betray you. Medieval households relied on such lamps regularly, especially in spaces where open hearths were impossible. They were inefficient by modern standards, but dependable. Oil burned slowly. Tallow smoked more, but it was easier to obtain. Choices like this depended on region, season, and availability, not preference. You feel the warmth on your hands when you hold them briefly toward the light palms open, then lower them again. That momentary comfort is enough. The rest of your body relies on layers and shared heat rather than fire. Underground shelters were never meant to be warmed like living rooms. They were meant to be tolerable. There is a small trick to using fire here. The wick is kept slightly damp, not enough to extinguish it, but enough to reduce smoke. This detail is rarely mentioned in popular descriptions, yet it appears in household knowledge passed down through generations. Whether everyone practiced it is uncertain, but those who did likely slept easier for it. You shift again, mindful of shadows. The light clings close to the lamp, leaving the corners of the dugout in darkness. That is intentional. Sharp light draws the eye and creates contrast. Soft, low light blends into the earth. It feels less intrusive, more natural. Your eyes adjust quickly, needing less and less illumination to orient yourself. As the night wears on, the temperature settles into a steady range. Earth regulates heat better than wood or stone. This is one of the reasons underground spaces were valued during extreme weather. In winter, they protected against biting winds. In summer, they offered relief from heat. People learned to read the seasons and choose when to use these shelters accordingly. You remember hearing that some dugouts showed signs of soot on the ceiling, evidence of repeated fires. Others remained surprisingly clean. This variation suggests differences in how people managed light and heat. Some may have relied more on body warmth and darkness. Others tolerated a bit of smoke for the comfort of a visible flame. There is no single answer, only patterns. You watch the flame flicker once responding to a subtle shift in air. The vent continues its quiet work, drawing smoke upward. This balance between airflow and concealment is delicate. Too much opening risks detection. Too little risks suffocation. The fact that many of these shelters were used repeatedly speaks to how well that balance was understood. You lower your gaze and let your eyelids droop. The warmth, minimal as it is, encourages rest. Fire has always had that effect. It signals safety, continuity, human presence. Even a tiny flame carries that message. There is an old belief that fire drives away unseen dangers. Whether this was taken literally or symbolically varies, but the comfort it provides is undeniable. Sitting here, you feel it too. The flame anchors you, marking the center of the space, giving shape to the darkness. You adjust your cloak again, turning slightly so your back faces the wall and your side faces the light. This position keeps you warm without overheating. Medieval people were skilled at managing discomfort in small ways. These adjustments were learned early and refined over years. The lamp burns steadily now, its flame barely moving. You trust it. That trust allows your body to relax further. Fire is no longer something you monitor constantly. It becomes part of the background, like your breath or the slow drip of moisture. Above-ground fires are being banked for the night. Hearths cool, chimneys breathe out the last of the day's smoke. Down here your small flame continues hidden and modest, doing just enough. Your thoughts soften again. The combination of warmth, stillness and familiarity pulls you closer to sleep. The dugout does not demand anything from you now. It holds its quiet shape, fire and earth working together to keep you unseen alive and slowly drifting back into rest. At some point you lose track of how long you've been down here. The idea of hours becomes vague, almost meaningless. Without sunlight or bells or the distant rhythms of daily life, time loosens its grip on you. You sense passing moments through your body instead. A shift in temperature, the deepening weight of fatigue, the way your thoughts stretch out and thin. You open your eyes briefly and are surprised by how little seems to have changed. The lamp still glows softly. The walls remain the same curved shapes. This sameness can be unsettling at first, but eventually it becomes calming. Underground change is slow. That steadiness allows rest to take root. In medieval life, time was often measured by natural markers rather than precise units. Sunrise and sunset mattered more than minutes. Meals, prayers, and fatigue structured the day. Underground, even those markers fade. People learned to rely on internal rhythms. When the body demanded sleep, they slept. When hunger stirred, they ate. It was a different relationship with time, less rigid, more responsive. You shift slightly and feel the stiffness in your limbs ease as you move. Rest here is deep, but not entirely still. People turned adjusted, rose briefly, then settled again. Sleep was often segmented, especially in periods before artificial lighting became widespread. Waking in the night was normal. Lying quietly in the dark, thinking or listening was part of the pattern rather than an interruption. You close your eyes again and notice how your thoughts drift without direction. There is no plan, no schedule to keep. The future feels distant. The past softens. All that matters is the present moment stretched out like the darkness itself. There is an interesting detail that emerges when considering how people marked time underground. Some shelters show signs of repeated use at particular depths or angles that suggest intentional positioning relative to sunrise or known landmarks. Whether this was deliberate or coincidental is unclear. Still, it hints that people tried to maintain some connection to the world above even when hidden from it. You become aware of your heartbeat again, slow and steady. It is comforting. The dugout feels almost timeless, as if it exists outside the normal flow of days. This sensation may be part of why underground spaces appear in so many myths and stories, as places of waiting or transformation. Your body sinks further into rest, muscles let go, Breathing deepens. The concept of morning feels abstract. You trust that it will come when it comes. Some accounts from later periods describe people emerging from hiding places, disoriented, surprised by how much time had passed. Underground without queues hours can collapse into what feels like moments. This distortion is not frightening, it is simply different. You roll slightly onto your other side, the straw whispering softly beneath you. The sound fades instantly. Nothing responds, no one stirs. The quiet remains intact. Time here is not something you track, it is something you inhabit. You exist within it rather than moving through it. This is a subtle but profound shift, one that modern life rarely allows. As you drift again, thoughts slow, further becoming less structured. Images come and go without effort. The dugout remains unchanged, steady and patient. Above the world continues its own rhythms. Somewhere a rooster will eventually crow, light will return. But those events feel far away, unimportant for now. Here in this pocket beneath the earth, time stretches and softens around you. You let it. Sleep deepens, waiting becomes rest. Warmth becomes the next thing you notice, not as a sudden comfort, but as something gradually negotiated between your body and the space around it. At first the ground had felt cool through the straw. Now that chill has softened, your body heat has nowhere to escape quickly, and so it lingers, settling into the small hollow where you lie. Underground warmth is earned slowly and held carefully. You pull your cloak tighter, tucking the edge beneath your chin. Wool presses against your skin, coarse but dependable. It smells faintly of lanolin and smoke, a reminder of sheep and fires and long days outdoors. Medieval clothing was designed less for fashion than for function. Layers mattered. Loose weaves trapped air. Even sleeping garments served a purpose beyond modesty. If you were not alone, bodies would be close, not touching constantly but near enough that heat could pass from one to another. Shared warmth was not sentimental, it was practical. Children placed between adults, elders positioned where drafts were weakest. These arrangements were not discussed every night, they were understood. Your knees remain drawn slightly upward, reducing the surface area exposed to the ground. This posture conserves heat and fits the space naturally. It also mirrors positions used by people across cultures when sleeping in cold conditions. Long before anyone spoke of ergonomics, bodies learned what worked. You notice how the air near the floor feels cooler than the air around your shoulders. Heat rises even here. That difference is subtle but real. Some dugouts were shaped to take advantage of this with slightly raised sleeping platforms or packed earth ridges along the walls. Archaeological impressions suggest intentional shaping, though not everyone agrees on how deliberate it was. Still, the result is clear. Where you lie matters. Your hands feel warmer now, fingers no longer stiff. You flex them slowly, then let them rest again. Movement generates heat, but too much movement wastes energy. Medieval life taught people to balance effort and conservation instinctively. Underground, that balance becomes even more important. There is an old belief that Earth itself provides warmth, that being surrounded by soil keeps cold at bay. While not entirely accurate in scientific terms, the experience supports it. The ground buffers extremes. Wind cannot reach you. Sudden temperature drops above ground barely register down here. That stability is its own kind of warmth. You think briefly about winter nights. Snow piling above the entrance. Frost hardening the surface soil. In those conditions, this dugout would feel almost gentle by comparison. Many people chose underground shelters specifically during the coldest periods, not just for safety from conflict, but from weather. Chroniclers mention families surviving harsh winters by retreating into earth houses when surface dwellings became too exposed. A quieter detail comes to mind. Some communities lined sleeping areas with animal skins during colder months. These added insulation and repelled moisture. Over time, the oils from the hides would soak into the earth, leaving traces that can still be detected centuries later. Not every site shows this, but enough do to suggest it was a common adaptation in certain regions. Your breathing creates small pockets of warmth near your face. You pull the cloak closer, leaving just enough space to breathe comfortably. Too much enclosure can make the air feel heavy. Again, balance. You're aware of your heartbeat steady and calm. Heat encourages relaxation. Muscles release their tension more easily when they are warm. The dugout feels less like a place of hiding and more like a cocoon shaped by use and necessity. Modern assumptions often imagine medieval nights as uniformly cold and miserable. That image overlooks the ingenuity of layering shared heat and environmental knowledge. People knew how to stay warm with limited resources. They had to. Survival depended on it. You shift slightly, redistributing weight to avoid pressure points. The straw compresses further, conforming to your shape. This creates a shallow impression that holds warmth even better. By morning it will be barely visible, smoothed away by the next movement. If others were here, breathing would create a subtle rise in temperature across the space, enough to notice, enough to matter. This collective warmth was one reason people tolerated the closeness. Isolation was colder in every sense. Your thoughts slow again as comfort increases. Cold sharpens awareness. Warmth blurs edges. The dugout seems to recede slightly, its walls less pressing, its ceiling less present. You feel held rather than confined. There is a faint memory of fire warmth lingering in the air, though the lamp itself offers little heat. Its presence earlier may have taken the edge off, but now your body does most of the work. That feels right. Fire is temporary. Body heat is constant. Some modern readers assume underground shelters were damp and freezing. In reality, many were carefully sited to avoid waterlogging and excessive cold. Failures certainly existed, but those did not remain in use long. People abandoned what did not work. What survives is often what succeeded. You exhale slowly, feeling warmth spread through your chest and shoulders. Your feet once cool are now comfortably numb rather than cold. This is the sweet spot. Not hot, not shivering, just enough. The dugout remains still around you, earth-insulating straw cushioning clothing holding heat close. Above, the night continues to cool. Down here, your small pocket of warmth persists. Sleep deepens again, encouraged by comfort rather than exhaustion. Your body settles into the temperature it needs, no longer adjusting, no longer negotiating. Warmth becomes background, like the darkness and the quiet. Held by earth and your own heat, you drift further, wrapped in layers of soil cloth and centuries of learned survival. Sometime in the night, you wake with a vague awareness of discomfort, not pain, just a sense that something needs adjusting. It takes a moment to remember where you are. Then the low ceiling, the earth smell, the quiet all settle back into place. Underground waking is slow like this. There's no sudden snap into alertness. Your body surfaces gently. You move carefully, rolling your shoulder, easing stiffness from your hip. Space is limited, so every motion is measured. You learn quickly which movements are safe and which risk knocking against a wall or floor. Even half asleep, your body remembers the boundaries. This kind of awareness becomes instinctive after only a few nights. Hygiene here is not about cleanliness as you might think of it now. It is about avoiding discomfort, illness, and attention. You scratch an itch lightly through fabric rather than directly on skin, reducing noise and irritation. Sweat dries slowly underground, leaving a faint residue that would feel unpleasant if allowed to build up. People learn to manage this with simple habits rather than washing. Water is precious in a space like this. You would not waste it on full washing unless absolutely necessary. Instead, a damp cloth might be passed quietly, from hand to hand, used to wipe faces or hands. Sometimes ash was rubbed lightly on skin to absorb oil and reduce smell. This practice sounds strange now, but it was common in a world where soap was not always available or prioritized. You become aware of your mouth feeling dry. You swallow, then take a small sip from your container, careful not to spill. Drinking too much would only mean needing to relieve yourself later, which brings its own complications underground. These decisions are constant but subtle. Comfort balanced against necessity. In some dugouts, shallow pits were dug specifically for waste lined with ash or earth to reduce odour. Others relied on containers that were emptied at first light. Evidence for these practices varies from site to site, which suggests flexibility rather than a single rule. People adapted based on how long they expected to remain hidden and how many shared the space. You adjust your cloak again, smoothing fabric beneath you to prevent chafing. Clothing was worn until it softened with use. Roughness was expected at first. Over time, garments moulded to bodies becoming more comfortable through wear rather than design. Underground nights accelerated that process. There is a faint awareness of smell again, but it does not bother you. The dugout smells lived in, not foul. That distinction mattered. People were skilled at recognizing when a space became unhealthy. If mold crept in or dampness lingered too long, the shelter was abandoned or repaired. Survival left little room for sentimentality. Your thoughts drift briefly to the effort required to keep a place like this usable. Maintenance was ongoing. Floors repacked, walls scraped and reinforced, entrances adjusted as ground shifted. This was not a one-time construction. It was a relationship with the earth requiring attention and labour. You scratch your head lightly and feel grit in your hair. Dust settles everywhere underground. It clings to skin fabric breath. People accepted this as part of hiding. Clean hair was a luxury of safety and sunlight. Down here, practicality overruled vanity. As you settle again, you find a position that eases the last traces of discomfort. Your body adapts quickly. What would feel unbearable in daylight becomes manageable in the dark. The absence of expectation helps. You're not trying to be comfortable. You're trying to endure quietly. Some modern accounts imagine medieval hygiene as careless or ignorant. That misses the point. People understood their bodies well. They just operated under different constraints. Cleanliness was situational. Underground, it was about minimizing risk, not achieving freshness. You close your eyes again, letting awareness fade. The dugout remains still. Nothing has changed. That sameness is reassuring. Your body warms once more, the brief wakefulness already dissolving into memory. Muscles loosen, breath steadies. The small adjustments you made will carry you through the rest of the night. Above the surface world continues with its own rules. Down here you follow a quieter set shaped by earth darkness and patience. Hygiene, like everything else, bends to necessity and then disappears from thought. Sleep returns deeper now, unbroken by discomfort. The dugout holds its quiet and you drift back into it, leaving the small practical concerns of the night behind you. You wake again, but this time it is not your body that stirs you. It is a thought. A quiet one, almost shy, rising up from somewhere beneath the weight of sleep. In the darkness, thoughts take on a different texture. They move slowly without urgency, and often drift toward things that feel larger than the moment. Fear lives here, but so does faith. You lie still, eyes closed, listening to your own breathing. In the Middle Ages, moments like this were often filled with prayer, even for those who were not especially devout by daylight standards. Faith was less a separate activity and more a background habit woven into daily life. Underground with danger imagined just beyond the soil, that habit surfaced easily. You murmur words quietly in your mind, not aloud. Sound is still something to be managed. These are familiar phrases learned early, repeated so often they no longer require effort. They are not dramatic pleas, they are steady practice comforts, asking for protection, for mourning, for the safety of those nearby. Even people who questioned religious authority often clung to personal rituals in moments like this. Charms tucked into clothing, a cross traced lightly against the chest, a whispered phrase passed down through family rather than church. Belief was flexible, shaped by fear and hope as much as doctrine. You feel your fingers curl slightly as if remembering the shape of an object that is not there. Many people kept small tokens close at night. a carved bead, a scrap of parchment with words written on it, a smooth stone believed to ward off harm. These items rarely survive in the ground, but references to them appear in records and stories suggesting they were common enough to be understood without explanation. There is a softness to this moment that surprises you. Fear does not sharpen, it loosens. Faith, whatever form it takes, gives your mind somewhere to rest. The dugout feels less like a trap and more like a shelter again. You think briefly about how belief and superstition often overlapped. A prayer spoken before sleep, a rule about which direction to lie, a warning never to whistle underground. These practices did not always have clear origins. Some were rooted in observation, others in tradition. Few people bothered to separate the two. In certain regions, it was believed that underground spaces belonged to older powers, not necessarily hostile, but easily offended. Respect mattered. Quiet mattered. Leaving offerings was rare in a dugout like this, but the idea of behaving properly still lingered. Whether this belief was widespread or limited to specific communities remains uncertain. What is clear is that people carried stories with them into the dark. You let your thoughts wander gently, then return to the rhythm of your breath. Faith here is not loud. It does not demand certainty. It exists alongside doubt without conflict. You do not need answers tonight. You only need to last until morning. There is a memory of candlelight in a church, the smell of incense, the echo of voices. Those memories blend with the present, with the faint smell of earth and oil. Sacred and ordinary mix easily. Underground boundaries blur. Your body relaxes further as the mental tension eases. Prayer, superstition, habit, they all serve the same purpose here. They slow the mind. They offer a sense of order in a space that could easily feel overwhelming. Some later writers imagined medieval faith as constant and unquestioning. The reality was quieter and more personal. People worried, they doubted, they hoped anyway. Nights like this did not create belief. They revealed it. You feel the weight of the earth above you not as pressure but as presence. It feels protective in its own way. The dugout, the prayers, the small rituals, they all work together, layers of defense against uncertainty. Your breathing evens out again. Thoughts grow less distinct. Words fade. What remains is a feeling steady and calm, like a hand resting lightly on your back. Above, stars move unseen. Dawn inches closer. Below you, let go of worry, trusting that whatever watches over you tonight, whether divine or simply human preparation, is enough. Sleep deepens once more, carrying your quiet faith with it into the dark. Sleep lightens again, not into wakefulness this time, but into a space where thoughts begin to form without effort. Stories surface here, not the kind told aloud, but the ones that circulate quietly, passed from mouth to mouth, over years, until no one remembers where they began. Underground, these stories feel closer somehow, as if the earth itself is listening. You lie still, eyes closed, and remember fragments. Warnings about what moves beneath fields at night. Tales of hidden folk who resent disturbance. Stories told to children not to frighten them, but to keep them quiet and close. Folklore served practical ends as often as imaginative ones. Silence was easier to enforce when wrapped in story. Someone once told you that certain sounds underground should never be answered. A knock without a source, a whisper that does not belong to anyone present. Whether anyone truly believed such things mattered less than the behavior they encouraged. Do not speak. Do not move. Stay still. In that sense, stories kept people alive. These tales differed by region, but their purpose was consistent. Underground spaces were liminal, neither fully part of the surface world nor entirely separate from it. That in-between quality made them fertile ground for imagination. People filled the unknown with meaning, shaping fear into narrative. You remember a story about lights seen moving under the earth, said to mark buried treasure or restless spirits. In reality, these were likely reflections, gases, or simple misunderstandings. Still, the stories persisted. They offered explanations in a world where scientific language was unavailable or irrelevant. There is a comfort in knowing these stories were shared. You're not inventing fear alone in the dark. You're participating in a long tradition of imagining what cannot be seen. That shared imagination makes the night feel less lonely. Some underground shelters show carvings or marks on their walls, simple symbols, lines, crosses. Their meanings are unclear. Some may have been structural guides. Others could have been personal marks or protective signs. The truth varies by site and context. What matters is that people felt the urge to leave something of themselves behind. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the stillness. The stories drift on softer now. They lose their edges, becoming more like impressions than narratives. The dugout does not echo them, it absorbs them. Modern retellings often exaggerate medieval superstition, turning practical caution into wild belief. The reality was more restrained. People knew when a story was a story. But they also knew that respect for the unknown carried little cost and possible benefit. So they observed the rules even if they smiled at them by daylight. You feel your thoughts slowing again. The stories no longer hold your attention. They fade into the background, joining the quiet drip of water and the steady rhythm of your breath. Above, the night continues without noticing you. Below, imagination settles back into sleep. The dugout remains unchanged, patient and silent, holding both fear and comfort without judgment. Rest takes you again deeper this time, carrying with it the echo of old stories whispered into the earth long before you arrived. You become aware of another presence, not as a sound or movement, but as a shift in how the space feels. Children. Even if none are here tonight, the dugout seems shaped by them. The low ceiling, the rounded edges, the way corners soften instead of sharp angles. These are not only practical choices, they are accommodations for small bodies that need to be kept safe and quiet. If children are here with you, they sleep differently. More deeply at first, then restlessly. Their breathing changes without warning. A small whimper, a sudden turn. Adults learn to anticipate this, positioning themselves close enough to intervene, without waking fully. A hand rests lightly on a shoulder. A palm covers a mouth before a sound escapes. These gestures are practiced gentle and quick. Elders too shape the night. They are placed where the ground is most even, where dampness is least likely to creep in. Joints stiffen more easily in the cold. Breathing can be shallow. Everyone knows who needs extra space and who can manage without. Care is distributed quietly without discussion. You notice how your own movements are influenced by this imagined arrangement. Even alone, you avoid sudden shifts. You imagine where a child might be lying, where an older body might need steadiness. These patterns linger long after the actual need passes. Underground nights teach restraint. There is a memory of being told as a child to stay very still if hiding. Stillness becomes a game at first. Who can be the quietest? Who can breathe without sound? Over time, the game loses its playfulness and becomes instinct. Children raised with this knowledge carry it into adulthood. Some families used underground shelters often enough that children associated them with safety rather than fear. The dark became familiar, the earth comforting. This did not make the experience pleasant, but it made it manageable. What is learned early shapes what feels normal later. You think about how stories were told in these spaces, not loudly but through touch and repetition. A hand squeezing twice to mean calm, a familiar pressure against a back. Words were not always necessary. Communication adapted to silence. Elders sometimes stayed awake longer, listening, watching the flame, marking time by breath rather than light. Age brought lighter sleep, but also patience. Younger bodies slept harder, trusting the presence of others. Responsibility flowed upward through the generations. The dugout feels fuller now in your mind, even if it is physically unchanged. It carries the weight of these relationships. Sleeping underground was never just an individual experience. It was shared, shaped by who needed what most. You adjust your position slightly, careful and slow. The earth does not respond. it remains steady. That steadiness allows care to happen without panic. Above, the night continues to pass. Below, bodies rest in their places, each one contributing to the quiet order that makes survival possible. Your thoughts soften again. The imagined presence of others fades, leaving behind a sense of belonging rather than absence. Even alone, you're not alone in time. Sleep settles back over you, shaped by memory habit and the quiet choreography of shared nights underground. You wake with the faint sense that something has shifted, though nothing inside the dugout appears different. The air feels the same. The darkness has not thinned. Yet your body senses change. This is how seasons announce themselves underground, not with light, but with subtle adjustments that ripple through habit and preparation. Above you, the land follows a rhythm you have learned to read without seeing it. In warmer months, the dugout is used sparingly, more a precaution than a necessity. Nights are shorter. Work stretches longer. People prefer to sleep near the surface where air moves freely. But as the year turns and uncertainty grows, this space becomes more familiar. You imagine autumn first. The ground above layered with fallen leaves. Fields harvested. The air carrying dampness that settles into clothing. During this time, the dugout smells different. Earthier, heavier. Moisture clings more readily to walls. Straw bedding is changed more often. Fires are used a little longer before being dimmed. Everything adjusts quietly. Winter changes the logic entirely. The surface becomes hostile in ways that are hard to predict. Snow muffles sound, but also leaves tracks. Frost hardens the ground, making quick digging impossible. In such conditions, the dugout offers something rare: consistency. The temperature here does not swing wildly. Wind cannot reach you. The earth buffers the worst of the cold. You curl slightly tighter at the thought of winter nights spent here. Cloaks layered. Breath visible for a moment before fading. The entrance sealed, more carefully packed with extra soil and covered with brush to blend into the frozen landscape. People planned for this. They chose when to rely on the dugout based on weather as much as danger. Spring brings its own challenges. Meltwater seeps downward, finding weaknesses in walls and floors. This is when the dugout demands attention. Drainage channels cleared, straw replaced, tools used more frequently. Nights here are shorter, less comfortable. People weigh the risks, carefully deciding whether hiding below is worth the damp discomfort. You feel a faint awareness of the ground beneath you, imagining how it responds to rain above. The slow movement of water through soil, the patience required to manage it. This is not a space you can ignore for long periods. It rewards care and punishes neglect. Summer, by contrast, offers relief. Heat above becomes oppressive. In some regions, underground spaces provided a cool refuge during the hottest days. While sleeping below in summer was less common, resting or storing goods there made sense. The dugout shifts roles, with the season adapting to need rather than remaining fixed. You realize how much planning goes into using a place like this. It is not an emergency reaction alone. It is part of a broader understanding of landscape and time. People watched the sky, felt the wind, noted how animals behaved. Decisions about when to hide, when to surface, and when to stay close to home were informed by these observations. Your body responds to the imagined cycle by settling deeper into rest. There is comfort in knowing this space fits into a larger pattern. It is not an anomaly. It belongs to the land as much as the fields and paths above. Some nights the dugout would remain empty for months waiting. Other times it would be used repeatedly in quick succession. That variability is written into its construction. Not too elaborate, not too fragile. Built to endure long pauses and sudden demands alike. You shift slightly the straw whispering beneath you. The sound reminds you that bedding must be refreshed with the seasons as well. Dry grass in summer, thicker straw in winter, sometimes animal skins added when cold lingered, each layer chosen for the conditions expected. Your thoughts drift to the people who remembered these cycles best. Elders, those who had seen many years. They carried knowledge that did not need writing: when to prepare the dugout, when to trust the surface, when to listen to the land more than rumours. Even now, lying here, you feel connected to that seasonal awareness. Your body senses temperature, humidity, the subtle pressure of soil responding to weather above. These cues guide rest as much as danger ever did. Above ground, the world turns. Crops grow and are cut. Snow falls and melts. Down here, the dugout waits ready to serve when needed, quiet and adaptable. Your breathing slows again, syncing with the imagined rhythm of seasons passing overhead. The thought of time no longer feels abstract. It feels circular, predictable, reassuring. Sleep returns, carrying with it the steady knowledge that this place, like the people who built it, was shaped by patience, observation, and a deep understanding of change. The night feels heavier now, not because of sleep, but because of what might be happening beyond the soil. This is when the dugout matters most. Not during routine hiding, not during weather, but when conflict presses close enough to be felt through the ground. You do not hear shouting or clashing metal. That would come later, if at all. What reaches you first is tension carried downward in the way your body refuses to fully relax. You lie still, listening for signs that danger has moved nearer. In times of unrest, people learn to read the land for warning. A sudden absence of sound. Dogs quiet when they should bark. Birds scattering all at once. Underground, these signals arrive faintly, if at all, but your body remembers what they mean. You imagine a village on alert. Fires extinguished early, doors barred, livestock driven away or hidden, people moving with purpose but little noise. Dugouts like this one were part of a wider response, not isolated acts of fear. They were used when walls were absent or unreliable, when flight was safer than confrontation. Conflicts in the medieval world were often small in scale but deeply disruptive. Raids rather than battles. Bands of armed men moving quickly, taking food, animals, and people if they could. For those without protection, hiding was often the only option. Sleeping underground during such times was not restful, but it was safer than being found. You feel your muscles tense briefly, then ease again. This is not the moment of attack, this is the waiting before it. People learned to endure this waiting, sometimes for hours, sometimes through entire nights. Dugouts were rarely meant to withstand a determined search. Their strength lay in being overlooked. The earth above acts as a shield, dulling sound and sight. Footsteps might pass within a few paces and go unnoticed. A campfire lit above might send warmth downward without revealing its source. The closeness of danger sharpens awareness without breaking calm. Panic wastes energy, stillness preserves it. There is a faint memory of instructions whispered long ago. Do not move unless told. Do not speak even if afraid. Trust that silence is working. These rules were simple because they had to be remembered under stress. Underground simplicity is survival. You press your palm lightly against the ground, feeling for vibration. Nothing unusual. The soil feels dense and unmoving. That steadiness is reassuring. It suggests that whatever passes above has not noticed what lies beneath. Some shelters show signs of hurried construction or reinforcement, hinting at periods when conflict flared unexpectedly. Others appear carefully planned, suggesting anticipation rather than reaction. This variety reflects how uneven medieval life could be. Peace and danger did not arrive on schedules. You imagine the sound of carts or horses passing at a distance. Those vibrations would feel different, more rhythmic. Tonight there is nothing like that. Only the slow, natural settling of earth. Your breathing remains shallow but steady. You resist the urge to count seconds or measure time. That only heightens anxiety. Instead, you focus on sensation, the coolness of the ground, the weight of your cloak, the faint warmth still held close. Underground fear does not shout. It hums quietly, manageable as long as you do not feed it. People learn to coexist with that hum, letting it sharpen attention without overwhelming thought. You remember that many conflicts passed without incident for those who hid well. By morning, signs of intrusion might be gone, leaving only disturbed earth or missing supplies. Life resumed quickly because it had to. The dugout holds firm, doing what it was made to do. It hides you not by strength, but by patience. It asks only that you remain quiet and trust the work already done. Gradually the tension loosens. Your body accepts that this night, like many before it, will pass without discovery. Muscles soften, breath deepens. Above danger moves on or never arrives at all. Below you remain unseen, carried through the uncertainty by earth and stillness. Sleep creeps back in, cautious but persistent, wrapping itself around the last edges of alertness. The dugout remains silent, keeping its secret as it has so many times before. As the night stretches on, you become aware of something subtle but familiar. Even down here, away from the surface world, order still exists. It is not enforced with words or gestures. It settles naturally, shaped by habit and necessity. The dugout may feel like a retreat from daily life, but the patterns of that life follow you underground. You sense where you would place yourself if others were here. Not in the centre, not by the entrance. There is an instinctive understanding of position. Those who move quickly stay nearer the ladder. Those who need more rest settle farther back. The arrangement forms without instruction, it always has. Leadership does not disappear in the dark, it changes form. The person who knows the dugout best sets the tone even without speaking. A glance in lamplight, a hand raised to still movement. Experience carries weight here more than rank or title. Underground knowledge replaces authority. You remember how decisions were made in moments like this. Quietly, a nod, a touch on the arm, no debate, no discussion. Too many words invite mistakes. The dugout rewards those who understand when not to speak. Even children learn this order early. They sense who to follow, who to stay close to. They understand when play ends and silence begins. That awareness becomes part of them, shaping how they move through the world above as well. There is a faint echo of daily hierarchy carried into the space. The one who owns the land, the one who built the shelter, the one who was hidden here before. These distinctions matter, but they soften in the dark. Survival compresses social distance. You shift slightly and feel how the space accommodates you. Not everyone would lie where you are. That place belongs to someone by habit. You're borrowing it now just as others borrowed before. Underground ownership is temporary. Some shelters show signs of repeated rearrangement. Floors worn smooth in different spots. Walls smoothed by hands at varying heights. These traces suggest movement, adaptation, not rigid order. People adjusted as circumstances demanded. You think about how conflict above could alter this quiet structure. Fear sharpens authority. The most experienced listener becomes central. The one who panics becomes isolated. Underground nights reveal character more clearly than daylight ever could. Yet there is also cooperation here. Shared silence, shared warmth, shared patience. No one survives underground alone for long. The space demands coordination even if it is never acknowledged. You notice how your own behavior aligns with this imagined order. You move less. You choose positions carefully. You wait rather than act. These habits linger, carried over from countless nights of learned restraint. Above ground, social rules are visible. Below, they are felt. The dugout teaches them through necessity rather than instruction. As fatigue deepens, the sense of order fades into background awareness. It no longer requires thought. It simply exists, supporting rest rather than demanding attention. You let your body sink back into stillness, trusting that if others were here, they would do the same. The quiet agreement holds unspoken but strong. The dugout remains unchanged, yet shaped by the invisible structure of human behavior. Even in hiding, even in darkness, people bring their patterns with them. Sleep returns again, smoother now, carried on the assurance that nothing here is chaotic. Everything has its place, including you. As the night deepens, your thoughts drift toward the people who most often shaped what happened in a place like this, without drawing attention to themselves. Women. Not as an idea or a role assigned from above, but as steady presences whose work made hiding possible long before anyone needed to hide. You picture hands smoothing straw into place, testing the floor for dampness, adjusting a cloak so it covers more than one body. These actions rarely announce themselves. They are practical, quiet, and essential. Underground, they matter more than words ever could. In daily life, above-ground labour was divided in ways that varied by region, season, and household. Below ground, those divisions softened. Whoever knew how to prepare food quietly did so. Whoever knew how to soothe a restless child took that task. Experience mattered more than expectation. You notice how many of the habits that make this night bearable are learned through repetition rather than instruction. Knowing how tightly to wrap bread so it does not crumble. Knowing how to move without stirring dust. Knowing when to wake and when to let sleep deepen. These skills were often passed informally through observation, often from women to children, shaping behaviour long before it was needed. There is a tendency in later retellings to imagine underground hiding as a male-driven response to danger. That image ignores the reality of preparation. Dugouts were not activated suddenly without warning. They were stocked, maintained, and kept ready. Much of that ongoing care fell to those who spent the most time managing households. You think about how food ended up here. Bread baked earlier and set aside, cheese wrapped and stored, water drawn and placed where it would not spill. These tasks required planning. Someone thought ahead. Someone decided what would be needed if the night turned dangerous. You shift slightly aware of how the straw beneath you has been arranged to minimize noise. That too is learned knowledge, knowing how much pressure it takes to settle bedding without making it crackle, knowing which spots on the floor stay dry longest. These details are not written down, they live in memory. There is a quieter kind of authority at work here, not the authority of command, but of competence. The person who knows how to fix a torn cloak in the dark, the person who knows how to calm fear without speaking. Underground, these abilities carry weight. You remember that many dugouts show evidence of repeated care rather than hurried construction. Floors repacked, walls smoothed, entrances reinforced. This suggests ongoing attention rather than occasional use. The work of maintenance rarely leaves dramatic traces, but it leaves consistency. You imagine a woman crouched near the entrance earlier in the day, checking that the hatch still fits, flush brushing away loose soil, pressing turf back into place. No ceremony, just routine. That routine is what allows you to lie here now without fear of discovery. Stories from the period often focus on men in conflict, but everyday survival depended on quieter labour. The night underground brings that reality into focus. There is no room here for spectacle, only for what works. You notice how your own comfort relies on layers prepared in advance. Clean enough straw, a cloak mended before it tore completely, food that does not spoil quickly. These are outcomes of foresight rather than reaction. Some later writers argued that women remained passive during times of danger. That view does not hold up when you consider the complexity of hiding. Organising silence, care and endurance is not passive work. It is active, demanding and often invisible. You think about how knowledge was shared, not through formal teaching but through doing. A child watching how a mother moves in the dark, learning when to stay still, learning when to help without being asked. These lessons shape survival more than any instruction shouted in daylight. The dugout feels shaped by this kind of attention. It is not just a hole in the ground, it is a space prepared and sustained by repeated acts of care. That care lingers even when the people who provided it are not present. You adjust your cloak again, feeling where the fabric has been reinforced. A patch sewn long ago, a seam strengthened where it once split. These small repairs extend the life of garments and reduce noise when they shift. Practical decisions made earlier echo into the night. Above-ground history often remembers names and battles. Below-ground memory lives in habits, in how quietly bread is unwrapped, in how children are soothed, in how space is shared. You let this thought settle without judgment. There is no need to assign credit or blame here, only to recognize that survival is collective, built from many kinds of labor working together. Your breathing slows again. The dugout remains unchanged, yet fuller somehow with the awareness of how much unseen effort supports this moment. Sleep returns deeper and steadier, carried by the quiet confidence that this place and the night itself have been shaped by hands that knew exactly what was needed, and did it without asking to be noticed. A faint sound reaches you so soft it could be mistaken for your own breathing. Then it comes again. A shuffle. A low exhale that is not quite human. Animals. Even underground, they are never entirely absent. In many nights like this, they are closer than you might expect. If livestock are present, they are not here by accident. Animals were valuable, sometimes more valuable than goods or tools. Hiding them protected food labor and future survival. Smaller animals were easier to manage below ground. Goats, sheep, even pigs in some regions, they brought warmth, noise, and risk in equal measure. You imagine a tether pulled short to limit movement. Straw laid thicker to muffle hooves. Someone positioned close enough to steady an animal if it startled. This required patience. Animals do not understand the importance of silence, but they respond to calm. Familiar hands, familiar scents. The presence of animals changes the atmosphere immediately. The air warms slightly, smells deepen, breath becomes heavier. These changes are noticed, managed, accepted. People who shared space with animals daily were used to this closeness. Underground, it simply intensified what was already normal. There are traces in some dugouts that suggest animals were sheltered alongside people. Compressed layers of straw mixed with droppings, hoof marks in packed earth. Not every site shows this, but enough do to make it clear that separation was not always possible or desired. You adjust your position instinctively, aware of how an animal might shift suddenly. Sleep becomes lighter when animals are near. Not because of fear, but because movement is unpredictable. A restless goat, a pig rooting softly. These sounds blend into the background after a while, but they never disappear entirely. There is a practical benefit too. Body heat. In cold conditions, the warmth from animals made a noticeable difference. People positioned themselves to take advantage of this without crowding. Children often slept closest, wrapped in cloaks tucked between larger bodies and steady flanks. You think about how trust develops in these moments. Animals sense tension. They respond to it. Calm is contagious. When people settle, animals follow. Underground nights taught this lesson well. Panic spreads quickly, so does stillness. Some stories mention animals alerting people to danger before any human sound was heard. A sudden stiffness, ears pricking, breathing changing. Whether these accounts are exaggerated or not, many people believed animals sensed what humans could not. That belief alone made their presence meaningful. You listen again. The sound fades. The animal has settled. The dugout breathes more evenly now, a shared rhythm of lungs and bodies. This closeness is not sentimental. It is practical companionship. Modern ideas of personal space would struggle here. Medieval life did not offer that luxury. People and animals shared homes, workspaces, and nights. Underground, that reality simply became more concentrated. You let the sound of slow animal breathing blend with your own. It becomes almost hypnotic. The risk remains, but it is balanced by warmth and familiarity. Above animals may be taken or scattered during conflict. Below those hidden, survive to return to fields and paths when danger passes. This continuity matters more than comfort. Your thoughts soften again. The presence of another living being nearby, even one that might snore or shift, brings reassurance. You're not alone in the dark. Sleep deepens once more, layered with quiet sounds and shared warmth. The dugout holding human and animal together until the world above grows safe again. You're not fully asleep when it happens. A change moves through the ground above you, subtle but unmistakable. Not a sound exactly, more like a pressure that does not belong. Your body responds before your thoughts do. Breath, pausing muscles tightening just enough to hold still. Footsteps feel different underground. They do not arrive as clear beats. They come as weight, a soft compression that passes through soil and bone together. You have felt rain like this. You have felt animals like this. This is neither. This has rhythm, intention. You remain motionless. Even blinking feels unnecessary. The dugout has trained you well. You know that sudden movement is more noticeable than stillness. The earth above carries sound, unevenly amplifying what should be faint and swallowing what should be loud. The safest response is to become part of that confusion. Another pressure passes, slightly closer, then farther away. Someone walking, not searching, not lingering. Perhaps unaware. Perhaps simply passing through. The uncertainty is worse than certainty, but you accept it. Underground life teaches patience more than bravery. You focus on your breathing, keeping it shallow and slow. Air moves in and out of your chest without effort. Panic would speed it up. You refuse that instinct. Stillness has worked before. It will work again. There is a faint scrape above, not metal, wood maybe, a cartwheel, or the edge of a boot brushing stone. These details matter, but you do not chase them. Guessing invites imagination, and imagination feeds fear. You press your palm lightly against the ground. The soil feels solid, unbothered. Whatever is happening above has not disturbed it enough to register clearly. That steadiness anchors you. You remember how people learn to read these signs, not through explanation, but through experience. Nights spent underground listening, comparing what was felt to what was later seen at dawn. Over time, patterns emerged. Rain spreads evenly. Animals pause and dart. Humans move with uneven purpose. The pressure fades. Silence returns. Not the deep silence from before, but something thinner, as if the night itself is holding its breath. You wait. Waiting is safer than relief. Another vibration passes farther away now, then nothing. The soil settles back into its slow, natural stillness. You release your breath quietly, barely moving your chest. Some nights ended like this. No discovery, no confrontation. Just the knowledge that danger passed close enough to be felt and moved on without noticing you. Those nights were remembered most clearly, not for what happened, but for what did not. You allow your body to soften again, though not completely. The edge of alertness remains. That edge has kept people alive for generations. It is not exhausting. It is practiced. Above, whoever walked past continues on their way unaware of what lay beneath their feet. Below, the dugout keeps its secret, doing what it was made to do by remaining invisible. Your breathing deepens gradually, muscles loosen. The moment passes without announcement. You do not celebrate. Celebration is loud. Sleep begins to return, cautious but steady. The ground above feels distant again. The pressure gone. The threat dissolved into memory. You let your eyes close fully now. The dugout holds you in its quiet shape, earth smoothing over the last traces of tension. The night continues, but it has lost its edge. You remain unseen, untouched, and carried forward by stillness into rest once more. Sleep thins, gradually not breaking, just loosening its hold as something lighter filters in. It is not light you notice first. It is a change in the air, a subtle freshness, a hint of movement where there was none before. Morning announces itself underground in quiet ways. Your eyes open without urgency. For a moment you stay still listening. The dugout sounds the same, but your body senses that the night has shifted. The long stretch of waiting is over, even if you cannot yet see proof. Above, the world is waking. You take a careful breath. The air feels slightly cooler, cleaner. The vent has begun to draw differently as temperatures change on the surface. This is one of the signs people learn to trust. Dawn alters airflow before it alters light. Long before clocks, this change told you when it was safe to think about moving. You do not rise immediately. No one ever does. Morning is not a signal to rush. It is a moment for patience. Many dangers linger after night passes. People who moved too quickly risked being seen by those who travelled at first light. Caution extends into day. You shift slowly, testing stiff limbs. The straw rustles faintly, then settles. Your body feels heavy but rested. Underground sleep does that. It is deep in short stretches, broken by awareness, leaving you tired but intact. You listen again. Birds above faint but present. Their call sound normal, unhurried. Animals are good indicators. If birds return to feeding and calling, it usually means the immediate threat has passed. Silence among them would be more concerning. You sit up carefully, rolling your shoulders, easing your neck. The ceiling remains close. You resist the instinct to stretch fully. Habit keeps movement small until you are certain the entrance is clear. Someone would normally check first, the most familiar with the land, the one whose eyes know what belongs and what does not. They would move quietly, lifting the hatch just enough to see not enough to be seen. Tonight that role falls to you. You approach the ladder slowly, every step placed with intention. The earth beneath your feet feels firmer, now cooler. Morning ground holds a different texture. You pause beneath the hatch, listening one last time. Nothing unusual, no voices, no movement that does not belong. You lift the hatch a fraction. Cool air slips down, immediately fresh and unmistakable. Daylight follows, thin at first, then stronger. The smell changes too. Grass, dew, smoke from distant hearths being stirred back to life. The contrast is sharp after hours underground. You hold still, letting your eyes adjust upward this time. Light feels almost intrusive. You blink slowly, scanning what you can see through the narrow opening. Ground looks undisturbed. No footprints too close. No broken cover. The disguise has held. You open the hatch fully and climb out careful to keep your body low until you're certain no one is watching. The morning feels vast. The sky wider than you remembered. After the closeness of the dugout, even familiar land looks open and exposed. You stand slowly, stretching at last muscles, grateful for space. The air feels cold against your skin, even if the season is mild. Underground warmth lingers in your bones. The breeze reminds you how vulnerable the surface can be. You look around, taking in details. Paths empty, fields quiet, a thin line of smoke rising from somewhere far off, but nothing close. Life is resuming cautiously like you are. You close the hatch again, carefully replacing turf and straw, pressing it back into place. The dugout disappears once more, returning to the land. It will wait until needed again, patient and unseen. There is a moment of relief now, but it is quiet. No one celebrates surviving the night. Survival is expected, not applauded. You simply move on to the next task. You brush soil from your hands and clothing, knowing it will cling anyway. Dust follows you above ground as much as below. It is part of you now. The dugout fades behind you, but it does not leave you entirely. Its lessons stay close. Move carefully. Listen before acting. Prepare before you need to. Morning work waits. Animals need tending. Fires need coaxing back to life. The night underground becomes just another layer in the day folded into routine. You take one last glance at the place where the entrance lies hidden. Nothing marks it now, just earth and grass, innocent and still. That invisibility is its strength. As you walk away, the sounds of morning grow clearer, birds louder, wind moving freely. Life resumes its ordinary shape. The dugout remains behind, holding the memory of the night without changing its form. You carry that memory with you, quieter than fear, steadier than relief. Another night has passed, another morning begins, and for now that is enough. Even after you've stepped back into the open air, the dugout does not leave your thoughts. It lingers as a quiet obligation, something that must be tended to if it is to remain useful. Hiding places survive only when they are cared for, and care begins almost as soon as the night ends. Later, when the light is fully established and the land feels safe enough, you return. Not openly, not directly, but as part of ordinary movement. You approach from an angle, circling rather than walking straight toward the entrance. Habits like this are learned early. A straight path leaves a story written into the ground. You kneel where the hatch lies concealed and run your fingers lightly over the surface. The turf still sits flush. No cracks. No sagging. That is a relief. Earth shifts constantly settling after pressure swelling with moisture shrinking in dry air. A dugout ignored too long announces itself in small ways before it fails completely. You lift the covering carefully this time, not to enter but to inspect. Inside, the air feels cooler in daylight, the contrast sharper. You do not stay long. Maintenance is quick and deliberate. Lingering underground during the day increases risk. You smooth the straw where it was disturbed, spreading it evenly again. Bedding that is left compressed holds moisture. Moisture invites mould. Mould weakens air and walls alike. These connections are understood without explanation. You do not need to know why something fails to know that it does. The walls receive your attention next. You brush away loose soil, pressing gently where the surface feels soft. Small collapses are easier to correct than large ones. A palm pressed flat. A handful of earth packed back into place. The work is quiet, almost meditative. You check the vent opening from below, making sure nothing has blocked it. Leaves, insects, damp clumps of soil. Even a small obstruction matters over time. You clear it carefully, mindful not to widen it, or leave obvious signs above. Everything here must balance function and concealment. Some people mark their dugouts in ways only they recognize. A stone set at a certain angle, a tree bent deliberately nearby. These markers are subtle enough to escape notice, obvious enough to guide those who know. You glance toward yours, now confirming it still reads correctly. You think about how often this work must be done, not daily but regularly, after heavy rain, after frost, after long periods of use. Dugouts that survive generations do so because someone keeps returning to them, correcting small problems before they grow. Tools come out briefly, the same spade you touched in the night, the same cord. They feel different in daylight, less urgent, more ordinary. Underground they are lifelines. Here they are simply tools again. You are careful not to leave fresh marks. Soil smoothed, footprints brushed away, loose straw scattered naturally. Animals moved across the area if needed to confuse tracks. This kind of camouflage becomes second nature. It is not about trickery. It is about blending back into the landscape. Maintenance also means knowing when not to use the dugout. If the ground feels too saturated, if the walls weep moisture, if the air feels heavy even with the vent clear, in those cases the risk outweighs the benefit. People learn to accept this even when it means giving up a familiar refuge. There are signs that some dugouts were abandoned for exactly these reasons. Collapses left unrepaired, entrances allowed to fill in, nature reclaiming the space. This is not failure, it is adaptation. What no longer serves is left behind. You replace the covering carefully and step back. From a short distance the ground looks untouched. That is the goal. A dugout should vanish when closed, existing only in memory and preparation. You stand for a moment stretching, feeling the sun on your face. Daylight brings a different kind of fatigue. The tension of the night lingers, but the body begins to reset. Work above ground resumes, but with an undercurrent of awareness. The knowledge that the dugout is ready again brings quiet reassurance. You may not need it tonight. You may not need it for weeks. But it is there, prepared, waiting without complaint. You walk away slowly, taking a slightly different path this time. Variety prevents patterns. Patterns invite attention. These choices become habits, then instincts, then simply the way you move. Behind you, the dugout settles back into stillness. Earth pressed, air moving invisibly, tools waiting in their places. It does not demand recognition. It only waits to be useful again. As you rejoin the ordinary rhythms of the day, the memory of the night underground softens. It becomes part of a larger cycle of preparation and use, care and rest. The land looks the same as it always has: fields, paths, trees, no sign of what lies beneath. That invisibility is the result of work, not chance. You carry on with the day, knowing that if the world above turns uncertain again, the ground will open quietly to receive you. For now, maintenance is complete, and the dugout returns to its patient silence. As the days pass and memory stretches backward, you begin to notice how different the dugout feels depending on where you imagine yourself living. This one is shaped by its land, its soil, its weather. Somewhere else far from here, a similar shelter would look and feel entirely different, even if it served the same quiet purpose. In places where the earth is soft and forgiving, dugouts are deeper rounded, more generously, almost womb-like in their curves. The soil allows it. It invites digging. In rocky regions, shelters are shallower, sometimes wedged into hillsides or built partly above ground and disguised with earth piled high. People adapt to what the land offers rather than forcing it to comply. You picture a shelter carved into chalk, pale walls reflecting what little light exists, or one dug into dark, heavy clay that holds moisture and demands constant attention. In forested areas, timber plays a greater role. Beams reinforce walls, branches and bark become part of the structure. In open plains, turf and sod replace wood stacked carefully to insulate and conceal. Climate changes everything. In colder regions, dugouts are smaller, easier to warm entrances tighter. In milder areas, they spread outward, allowing more movement and storage. Some are meant for short nights of hiding. Others are shaped to hold families through longer periods of danger or weather. You realize that the dugout you slept in carries assumptions about how often it will be used. It expects visits. It expects care. Elsewhere, a shelter might be built only for rare emergencies left untouched for years at a time. Those feel different, emptier, less worn by bodies and habit. There are places where underground shelters connect to above-ground structures hidden beneath floors or behind walls. In others, they stand alone, separated from homes to reduce risk. These choices reflect not only geography but social trust. Who is likely to come looking? Who is likely to betray? You think about how language changes too. Different names for similar spaces, words shaped by dialect and tradition. Each name carries a slightly different meaning, hinting at how the shelter is understood. As a hiding place, a storage space, a refuge, a last resort. Some regions favour long, narrow passages leading to small chambers. Others prefer wider rooms with multiple exits. Multiple exits suggest greater fear of discovery, but also greater confidence in planning. One way in and out is simpler but riskier if blocked. You imagine travelling and encountering these differences firsthand, recognising the purpose immediately even if the shape surprises you, knowing how to move, how to lie down, how to listen, even when the walls curve differently or the ceiling presses closer. The land teaches its people how to hide. Mountain soil encourages stone, wet ground demands drainage, sandy earth requires reinforcement. These lessons are learned through failure as much as success. Collapsed walls, flooded floors, abandoned shelters that quietly disappear back into the landscape. You realize that there is no standard design because there is no standard danger. Raids come differently. Weather changes unpredictably. Authority reaches farther in some places than others. The dugout responds to all of this without ever announcing its logic. Even now, thinking about it, you can feel how your body would adapt, how you would choose a place to lie, how you would test the air, how you would judge whether the ground feels trustworthy. These instincts transfer easily from one place to another. Some shelters are barely large enough to crouch. Others allow several people to sit upright. Neither is better. Each reflects a calculation made by someone who weighed effort against benefit and decided this was enough. You think about how these regional differences confuse later observers. Without context, a dugout can be misread. Storage mistaken for shelter, shelter mistaken for ritual space. The truth often lies in wear patterns and small signs of human presence rather than grand design. But from inside, the purpose is always clear. When you're lying in the dark listening, it does not matter what the walls are made of. What matters is whether they hold. Your breathing slows again as the thought settles. This dugout is one of many shaped by its place and time. It is not unique, yet it is specific. That balance makes it effective. Above-ground landscapes differ wildly. Below, the experience converges. Earth presses close. Silence matters. Preparation saves lives. You let the thought drift away, replaced by the steady knowledge that wherever you might be, people learn to bend the ground into shelter, using what they had and leaving little behind. The dugout becomes less a single place and more an idea now carried across regions by necessity and patience. And in that shared idea you find a strange comfort. Long after the people who slept here have moved on, the ground keeps quiet records of their nights. You imagine centuries passing seasons, layering soil roots, pushing gently through packed earth. Above fields are ploughed and replanted. Paths shift, names change. Below traces remain subtle but persistent. What survives is rarely obvious. A shallow depression where the roof once dipped. A patch of soil that holds moisture differently from the rest. Stones arranged in a way that feels intentional rather than natural. To an untrained eye, these signs mean nothing. To someone who knows what to look for, they speak clearly. You picture someone kneeling here long after your time, brushing dirt away with careful hands. They pause when they find compacted layers that do not match the surrounding soil. Ash pressed flat where fires once burned low. Straw fragments turned dark with age. These are not dramatic discoveries. They are quiet confirmations. Entrances are the hardest to find. The best ones were meant to vanish completely. Over time they collapse inward, filling with soil until the outline disappears. Sometimes a line of darker earth remains marking where the hatch once sat. Sometimes nothing at all. The land heals over its secrets efficiently. You think about how easily such places could be missed or misunderstood. A hollow mistaken for an animal burrow. A narrow passage dismissed as erosion. Without context, underground shelters slip past notice. This invisibility is why so many remain undiscovered even now. There are moments when chance reveals them. A farmer's plough catches on something solid. Heavy rain exposes a gap where soil is washed away. Construction work uncovers a cavity that should not exist. These discoveries are often accidental, sudden glimpses into lives that were never meant to be seen. When such spaces are uncovered, the contents are modest. Broken pottery, iron nails, wooden fragments preserved where air never reached. These items do not tell stories on their own. They require patience and imagination. They require someone to think about nights like the one you spent below ground. You realize that absence matters as much as presence, the lack of valuables, the lack of decoration. These omissions speak clearly. They suggest purpose focused on survival rather than display. People did not bring what they could not afford to lose. Marks on the walls sometimes appear, scratches from tools, smoothed areas where hands rested. These are human signatures, unintentional but unmistakable. You imagine how many times someone leaned there listening, waiting, breathing quietly. Some sites raise questions that remain unresolved. Was this space used often or only once? Did it shelter a family or serve a different function entirely? Without written records, answers remain incomplete. The earth offers clues, but not certainty. You find comfort in that uncertainty. Not everything needs to be explained fully. The dugout did its work without documentation. It does not demand interpretation. It simply existed when needed. You imagine standing above such a site without knowing it lies beneath your feet, walking past without pause, life continuing uninterrupted. The idea feels appropriate. These places were never meant to interrupt the surface world. Even when uncovered, they resist full understanding. Too much has been lost to time. Organic materials decay, memories fade. What remains is shape, position, and where. Enough to suggest never enough to confirm everything. You feel a quiet respect for that restraint. The dugout does not reveal more than it has to. It keeps its nights to itself, offering only fragments to those who arrive too late. Your thoughts drift back to your own night underground. The sounds, the waiting, the slow return of morning. None of that leaves clear marks, and yet, somehow it does. The ground remembers in its own way, not through stories, but through pressure and absence, through patterns that only emerge when someone looks closely enough. You let that idea settle. Long after the night passes, long after the people are gone, the earth continues to hold what it can, quietly and without judgment. When you think back on the dugout now, it becomes clear how much of its story exists in the spaces between certainty. Not everything about nights like this can be pinned down neatly. Some details blur, others contradict, and that uncertainty feels appropriate. Life underground was shaped by circumstance more than rules, and memory reflect that. You picture two people standing over the same hollow in the ground, centuries apart, reaching different conclusions about its purpose. One sees a refuge used only in moments of crisis. The other imagines a space returned to again and again, woven into daily life during unstable years. Both ideas feel possible. Both carry weight. The ground itself offers mixed signals. Where on the floor suggests repeated use, yet the absence of long-term debris hints at restraint. Walls smoothed by hands but no permanent fixtures. Evidence points in more than one direction at once. This is not confusion. It is complexity. You remember how the dugout felt during the night. Familiar but not comfortable. Prepared but not welcoming. That balance makes it difficult to categorize. It was not a home. It was not a shelter meant to be forgotten either. It lived somewhere in between. Some people likely slept underground often, especially in regions where danger lingered close to the surface. Others may have descended only once or twice in a lifetime, carrying the memory like a scar or a secret. The same structure could serve both experiences across generations. You think about how oral memory works. Stories compress time. A single dramatic night can stand in for many quieter ones. Over time, people remember the fear more clearly than the routine. That skews how later listeners imagine these places. You also consider how silence shapes understanding. People who hid successfully did not record their experiences. They survived and moved on. Those who did not left no stories at all. What remains is bias toward absence rather than presence. The dugout does not clarify its own history. It offers no dates, no labels. Only the suggestion that someone once needed to disappear for a while and prepared accordingly. That suggestion is enough. You realize how tempting it is to search for definitive answers, to want a clear explanation. But underground life resists that impulse. It was flexible by design, used when needed, ignored when not. Its meaning shifted with each visit. You think about how modern observers bring their own expectations. Some look for evidence of hardship and see suffering everywhere. Others focus on ingenuity and see resilience. Both are present, but neither tells the full story alone. The truth likely lies in quiet repetition. Nights spent listening, mornings spent checking the entrance, weeks when the dugout remained untouched, then sudden use again. Life did not follow clean patterns, it adapted constantly. You feel a strange comfort in this ambiguity. It mirrors how the night felt, uncertain but manageable. You did not know what was happening above, you only knew what to do below. The dugout offered no guarantees, it reduced risk. That distinction matters. People who used it understood that hiding was not the same as safety. It was simply the best available option at the time. You think about how memory simplifies survival into stories. In reality, survival is often boring. Long stretches of waiting, small adjustments, careful repetition. The dugout embodies that boredom. It does not dramatize itself. Even now, lying here in thought, the space feels quiet and unresolved. That feels honest. The earth does not rush to explain itself. It lets questions linger. You imagine future minds puzzling over similar traces, filling gaps with interpretation. Some will get close, others will miss the mark entirely. That does not diminish the original experience. It simply means it cannot be fully recovered. You let go of the need to know exactly how often the dugout was used or by whom. Those details fade naturally. What remains is the feeling of being held by the ground of trusting preparation more than certainty. That feeling is enough to carry forward. It does not require clarification. It only asks to be remembered as it was, partial, quiet, practical. Your thoughts slow again, the questions settling without answers. The dugout recedes from analysis back into memory where it belongs. You rest with that, allowing the night to remain what it always was. A place of waiting, a place of survival, a place that does not explain itself and never needed to. As the memory of the dugout settles further into the past, you notice how easily the image shifts when retold. In your mind, it is already simpler than it was, cleaner, more dramatic. That is what stories do. They sand down the rough edges and highlight what feels most important, even when those details were barely noticed at the time. You have seen illustrations like this. Underground spaces drawn as elaborate chambers lit by steady flames. People huddled in silence as if frozen in fear. These images feel convincing, but they miss something essential. The reality was quieter and more ordinary, less heroic, less desperate, more routine. The dugout was not a place of constant terror. It was a place of waiting. That distinction matters. Waiting is dull. Waiting is repetitive. Waiting is uncomfortable without being unbearable. Those qualities do not translate well into legend. You think about how easily modern expectations creep in. Clean lines, clear purposes, the idea that every space must have a single function. The dugout resists that. It was many things depending on the night. Storage, refuge, a place to cool off, a place to hide. Sometimes all of these at once. There is a popular belief that people underground lived in darkness broken only by firelight. In reality, light was used sparingly, often avoided altogether. Darkness was not the enemy. Attention was. Being unseen mattered more than being comfortable. You also hear people assume that these shelters were cramped beyond endurance. Some were. Others allowed room to sit, even to lie out fully. Comfort varied widely, shaped by soil skill and need. One dugout cannot stand in for all of them. You smile slightly at the idea of how these spaces are sometimes described as primitive. The word misses the point. They were not crude because of ignorance. They were restrained because excess increased risk. That kind of restraint takes understanding. There is a quieter correction to make as well. Not every dugout was used in a moment of violence. Some sheltered people from weather, some protected food, some simply offered a cool place during heat. To reduce them all to fear-driven hideouts flattens their purpose. You think about how the absence of decoration is often read as poverty or desperation. But decoration underground would have been a liability. Smooth walls and bare earth reduce sound and scent. Ornament would only catch light and attention. The idea that people slept underground constantly is also misleading. Most preferred the surface when possible. The dugout was a choice made when circumstances demanded it. That choice carried inconvenience, not resignation. You remember the sensations that never make it into stories. The smell of damp straw, the way sound fades quickly, the weight of earth pressing close without actually touching. These are hard to describe, easy to forget. You realize how much modern storytelling craves extremes, either misery or ingenuity, either fear or bravery. The dugout exists between those poles. It represents adaptation, not drama. The more you think about it, the more the myths fall away. What remains is something less exciting but more honest. People did what they had to do with what they had. They prepared, they waited, they emerged and continued. You find comfort in that ordinariness. It feels more relatable than legend, more human. The dugout was not a symbol, it was a tool. And like most tools, it fades from attention once it has done its job. It does not demand memory. It only demands readiness. You let the simplified images dissolve, replaced by the quieter truth you experienced. The truth that hiding underground was rarely cinematic. It was practical, repetitive, manageable. That truth lingers more gently than myth. It settles into the background of your thoughts where it belongs. With distance, the night underground begins to feel less like an interruption and more like a measure of endurance. You're not thinking about fear anymore. You're thinking about what it took to make that night ordinary enough to survive. Endurance rarely announces itself. It shows up quietly through habits repeated until they no longer feel remarkable. You remember how your body adapted first, the way it learned where to place weight, how to breathe shallowly without effort, how to wake and settle again without panic. None of this required bravery. It required patience. Patience was easier to maintain than courage. Endurance also lived in preparation. Someone had thought ahead. Someone had chosen the location, carefully tested the soil, learned how water moved after rain. Someone had decided how deep was deep enough, how narrow was narrow enough. These decisions mattered more than strength. You think about how this kind of endurance rarely leaves monuments. There are no grand remains to admire, no inscriptions celebrating survival. The dugout did not stand out on the landscape. That invisibility was its success. It becomes clear that endurance here was collective rather than individual. One person alone could not manage everything required. The night depended on shared silence, shared warmth, shared restraint. Each person carried a small part of the effort. Together it added up to safety. You remember the long stretches of doing nothing, waiting without knowing how long it would last. That kind of endurance is harder than action. Action has a clear end. Waiting does not. Underground nights trained people to tolerate uncertainty without breaking. You notice how much of this endurance was learned early. Children absorbed it by watching, by being corrected gently, by feeling when movement was allowed and when it was not. Over time, this knowledge became automatic. You think about how different this is from how endurance is often described now. Modern stories favour struggle and triumph. The endurance of the dugout was quieter. It was about not drawing attention, about choosing the least dramatic response. There is a memory of waking in the night, not because of danger, but because your body needed to shift. You did so carefully, barely stirring the straw. That restraint required awareness, even in half sleep. Over time, it became instinct. Endurance also meant knowing when to stop using the dugout, when to abandon it, when to let it fill in and disappear. Holding on too long could be as dangerous as leaving too soon. Letting go was part of survival. You realize that this kind of endurance does not fit easily into simple narratives. It lacks a clear beginning and end. It repeats. It adapts. It fades into routine. That makes it easy to overlook. But lying here now, thinking back, you feel its weight. Not heavy, but steady. Like the earth above the dugout, it does not crush, it supports. You consider how many nights like this were lived without comment, how many people never spoke about them again. Survival did not require retelling, it required continuing. There is a sense that this endurance shaped more than just nights underground. It shaped how people moved through uncertainty in general. How they prepared without knowing exactly what they were preparing for. How they accepted inconvenience as a trade for safety. You feel a quiet respect for that mindset. It does not romanticize hardship. It does not seek it out. It simply meets it when necessary. The dugout becomes a symbol now not of fear but of restraint, of knowing when to hide and when to re-emerge, of understanding that survival is often about choosing not to be seen. You let that thought settle gently. There's no need to analyze it further. It carries its own calm. Your breathing slows again as the reflection fades. The endurance you're thinking about feels familiar now, not distant. It lives in small decisions, in patience, in readiness. The night underground no longer feels like an anomaly. It feels like part of a larger pattern of living carefully in an unpredictable world. You allow that realization to soften into rest, knowing that endurance does not need to be proven or praised. It only needs to be practiced. At last the memory loosens its grip on you. The dugout no longer feels close around your body. It feels distant, softened by time and repetition, like a place you once knew well, but no longer need to visit. Sleep, real sleep. Not the cautious drifting of the night underground begins to return. You sense this shift in your body first. Muscles release fully now. The last traces of alertness drain away without resistance. There is no reason to listen anymore, no reason to measure breath or weigh movement. The danger has passed, and with it the habits that kept you hidden. The image of the dugout fades gently. Its walls blur. The smell of earth softens into something neutral, almost clean. The low ceiling lifts. The darkness thins until it becomes the comfortable darkness behind closed eyes rather than a physical space. What remains is not fear or discomfort, but a quiet respect for what that place allowed. It gave you time. It reduced risk. It asked very little in return. That exchange feels fair, even generous. You notice how your thoughts slow, further no longer forming complete reflections. Ideas drift in and out without shape. The story you've been holding dissolves into sensation, warmth, stillness, weight settling evenly across your body. The dugout becomes symbolic now, less a physical space than a reminder. A reminder that survival does not always require confrontation. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires becoming small and quiet and waiting for the world to move on. That lesson lingers briefly, then fades too. You do not need to hold on to it consciously. It has already done its work. Your breathing deepens into an easy rhythm. Each inhale feels unremarkable. Each exhale carries you further away from effort. The night you imagined no longer asks anything of you. Above ground, above time, above memory, sleep takes over completely. The last thing you sense is a gentle feeling of being held. Not by earth this time, but by rest itself. Nothing presses. Nothing demands attention. You let go. The world softens around you and the quiet stretches on without edges. Wind down now, there is no dugout, no earth above you, no reason to listen or prepare. You're exactly where you need to be. Safe, still, allowed to rest without vigilance. Your body sinks into its own weight, supported fully. Shoulders loosen, jaw unclenches. Breath flows without thought, slow and even like a tide that knows exactly where to go. The images from the night drift farther away, becoming vague impressions rather than scenes. Earth tones blur into darkness. Sounds dissolve into silence. Even the idea of waiting disappears. There is nothing left to manage, nothing left to remember. The work is finished. If any thoughts rise now, they do so gently without urgency and fade just as easily. You do not need to follow them. You do not need to solve anything. Sleep is already carrying you forward. Your breathing becomes deeper, slower, heavier. Each breath draws you down into rest, like sinking into warm water that holds you effortlessly. The quiet around you is complete and kind. It asks nothing. It offers only calm. You're allowed to sleep deeply now, to drift without awareness of time, to rest without listening. The night is over. The ground has released you. The story has ended. There is only sleep now.